Vince.
Yeah, we're off. Bye, guys.
It's time to kick this from just inside the lower half. Out to right wing. And there is Brian Topple. Now Meninga, Adrian Lamb, Michael Hay.
Power through to the end of the year with Bunnings Trade. Check out our new range of cards.
Or this 3800 PSI model, just 1,300. That unfortunately YouTube had deleted. It was back in the days of Peck. Hey everybody, welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we actually have me as the guest. I was asked a while ago through a YouTube comment if I could re-upload a video that unfortunately YouTube had deleted. It was back in the days of Peck Underground Church, which we actually have talked about possibly reviving. So we might be doing that. But it was about what the locusts are in Revelation 9, how it might connect with CERN and some emerging technologies and things like that. I did a really long 3.5-hour teaching on that. Don't worry, this is not going to be that long. At least I don't think so. But unfortunately, YouTube deleted it, and I didn't have a backup copy. It was actually one of the reasons that caused me to start Daily Renegade and do what we're doing now in the way that we're doing it. So that if YouTube does delete a video, we'll have it backed up at the website, dailyrenegade.com for members. But I was asked in a comment if I could re-upload that. So I decided, I can't re-upload it, unfortunately, because I don't have it. The entire teaching, a lot of that was a kind of a spontaneous Bible study. So it was me going through the scriptures and then kind of talking about things that would come up in my memory, things that I've studied before while I was reading the scriptures. And it wasn't like from a list of notes or like a script or anything like that. So what I decided to do today, instead of trying to do that again, because a lot of it was kind of haphazard and it was more of an organic kind of Bible study than it was an actual solid point by point teaching. So I decided to take all that stuff that I've written before, everything that I know about the locusts, Revelation 9, CERN, how these things might connect and how this could be fulfilled in the future. Also, how Revelation 9 connects with the book of Ezekiel, with Ezekiel's vision in chapter 1, how it shows the identity of these locusts, actually, the species of angels or spiritual beings that these things are, where they come from, what they're going to do, that kind of thing. I decided to just put all of that together. Oh, what the faces represent in Ezekiel, lots of cool stuff. But I decided to just put that all.
This is how I used to get paid. Post email. All invoices now. 300.
Put that all together in a note-by-note kind of thing, so I can actually give you a teaching. So while I can't re-upload that video, what this is going to be is so much better than that, because this is going to be point by point. It's not going to be long gaps of me looking up Bible verses and trying to figure things out. It's not going to be organic like that. It's going to be more of a solid teaching. So that's what I wanted to do today for the Sharpening Report. I rarely ever just do this show by myself without a guest, but when I do, I've noticed that people tend to enjoy it, and I've actually had some people ask me to do more of that. So if you do want more of that kind of thing, by the way, I do host JPD Weekly, which is a show that's basically the Sharpening Report without a guest. It's just me kind of talking about Bible things. Oh, and real quick, I probably should mention too that the other reason I'm doing this is I'm trying to get a bunch of episodes done ahead of time, which will all be available at dailyrenegade.com, but you always get early access if you're a member there. But I'm doing this because my wife and I, Christina and I, we're expecting any time now our 5th child, Anya Rain Peck. So this will be my 3rd daughter, 5th child. And we're expecting Anya anytime. So she's about to be born. I want to make sure that I have enough of these made and recorded ahead of time, so you guys don't have to lose out on anything, and I don't have to worry about things for a little while. So please keep us all in prayer over that. That would be great. Okay, now we can jump into it. Believe it or not, this study begins in quantum physics. It begins with a particle called a graviton. And what does gravitons have to do with the Revelation 9 locusts? You will see. It's actually really cool, this connection. But the graviton is probably one of the strangest theoretical particles ever hypothesized. Now, I say theoretical because gravitons have never been directly observed, but physicists are confident in their existence because of the presence of the gravitational field. So every field produces a particle, and it would be weird if the gravitational field was the only one that didn't do that. So because there is a gravitational field, it is possible that a soon discovery might take place by means of particle colliders like the LHC at CERN. So basically what happens there, they collide particles together, all that energy ripples out into the surrounding quantum fields, and when a quantum field has energy or ripples, that ripple is a particle. That's what a particle actually is. So the idea is put a bunch of energy into the surrounding fields and see what particles come out of that. So it's possible a graviton could be discovered that way or observed that way, because that's how lots of particles have been discovered, such as the Higgs boson. Now, gravitons, they're obviously the particles associated with gravity. Gravity in itself.
I've got to get one first, Trace. I haven't got a Christmas tree, but I'm going to get one with. I'll probably go down tomorrow or something. I haven't thought about it yet.
Is still kind of a mystery in a lot of respects, but due to scientific advancements, the world might not be too far off from the holy grail of physics, definitive proof that the graviton actually exists and the means to study its properties. Now, what makes the graviton especially interesting is its apparent ability to flow between spatial dimensions. So along with other potential discoveries, the graviton is obviously at the top of the LHC's to-do list. CERN's very interested in this. But gravitons seem to be able to, it doesn't seem like they're rooted into our reality in the way that other particles are. They seem to be able to flow in and out between dimensions. It might be part of the reason why gravity is so weak compared to the other forces. And that's a big question in physics. It could be because gravity's, in a sense, leaking into these other dimensions. So that could be a part of it. So gravitons seem to be able to not have to be bound by our dimensions of physical reality. So keep that in mind, because that's interesting. So the idea is not always to just look for the graviton itself, but to look for a gap where particles should be after a collision. So the two particle detectors of the LHC at CERN, which are called CMS and ATLAS, they're able to show us the aftermath of a particle collision. So as in any collision, debris is kind of thrown out and distributed pretty evenly. That's kind of a crude way of saying it. Really, it's kind of it's sort of created. But anyway, if the detector shows a gap where debris or new particles should be, but there's a gap there, that could be evidence that they've escaped into a higher dimension. That could be evidence that those are gravitons, because for a lot of reasons, they suspect that gravitons can actually do this. Now, there's an idea that gravitons can be used as a way to communicate with beings of higher dimensions. And of course, like any scientific theory or idea, it gets popularized in media, in Hollywood. So if you remember the movie Interstellar, they kind of explored this idea. Now, they crossed some things. You know, I mean, I love that movie, by the way, but they kind of mixed up the fourth dimension of space and the dimension of time. And there's always confusion there. Is time the fourth dimension? Well, yes and no. It depends on how you define dimension. If you're only talking about dimensions of space, there's no reason to really think that time is a spatial dimension. There's some models where it could be seen that way, but there's no real reason to think that. It could be, but by and large, when they say it's the fourth dimension, it just means of all the dimensions that we know, spatial and temporal, time is the fourth one that we just list out. So it's more of kind of a subjective thing. Anyway, It doesn't matter. But we saw that idea explored in Interstellar. And again, that might sound like the stuff of science fiction, but physicists today are seriously considering this possibility. If gravitons are discovered and used as a way to communicate with beings of higher dimensions or parallel universes, this might be what tells us that the world the world that we know of it, our world, that we're not alone. It might be the thing to tell us that we're not alone in this world. While many are waiting for a type of disclosure event of UFOs, which actually we've gotten quite a bit of that in recent years. But a lot of people are waiting for that. They're waiting for spacecrafts to be discovered or UFOs and sightings and stuff. We might actually be surprised to find out that these beings pretending or presenting themselves are going to show up in a different way. And so we got to think about that. It might not be that the aliens are from another planet. It might be that the aliens are from another dimension. And that might begin with an established communication through gravity, through gravitons, because again, gravitons can go between dimensions. They don't have to be rooted in ours. Now, in September of 2015, for the first time ever, if you guys remember this, gravitational waves were detected. Now, before that time, gravity waves, gravitons, and the gravitational quantum field have been largely speculative and theoretical. Gravitons have never really been directly observed before then. The effects of the gravitational field are seen every day, of course. If you drop a ball, it falls. But without actually observing the waves or particles of gravity itself, there's a limit to what can be learned and accomplished. But now that waves of gravity have actually been detected, there's no telling what
should the future deliver? Progress?
Telling what the
Hi, good to
ramifications will
see
be.
ya.
And keep in mind, this happened 5 or 6 years ago. We know that technology can come about really fast, especially when scientists are motivated to do something. So these things can come about pretty fast. What might be available now that we are not aware of? You can only guess. Now, this detection.
Yeah, Tracy, we made Monday's date day. That's why I don't go streaming on my Monday, because I go out on a date with Gabe. So we're going fishing tomorrow. I'll take some photos and show you guys. Looking forward to it.
Was achieved by the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, or LIGO for short. The actual waves were created by the merging of two black holes, the collision. One the mass of 29 suns, and the other the mass of 36 suns. So each black hole is estimated as being about 30 miles in diameter. Gravity waves, by and large, these gravity waves, they're so weak that it takes an extremely sensitive detector like LIGO to be able to detect these things. LIGO can measure distortions as small as 1,000th the size of a proton, which is just an unimaginable small size. The gravity waves that LIGO detected lasted only 1/5 of a second. And even more amazing, the detection happened at greater than a 5 sigma standard of proof, which is it's pretty big. I mean, it means basically the sigma standard that quantum physicists use. Everything is based on probability. So everything, there's like if you flip a coin and 50% of the time it comes up heads, 50% of the time it comes up tails. Well, that's what you would expect. Nothing weird is going on. If you flip a coin and 100, or let's say 99% of the time it comes up heads, something's going on. There's something wrong with that. There is something that is affecting the outcome of the coin, right? And so that's kind of like the sigma test. So when they detect things, the way that they can tell an actual discovery from things that are already known or from just background noise is they use the sigma test. And the 5 sigma is a really high standard. So that's how they're able to discover things and show that, like, yeah, this is not background noise. This is exactly what we think it is, or at least there's a very high probability. that it is. So that's how they're able to tell. Now, on one hand, that discovery is really exciting. I mean, after all, any aspect of God's creation that can be detected, that can be shown, that can be learned from, that's really exciting. But another piece of his grand design can now be understood a little bit better because of this discovery. But that could turn into troubling news if and when mankind decides to use this knowledge for dangerous and potentially disastrous goals. When you look at the goals that they have at CERN, not all of them are respecting of God. So what could this discovery bring? And I promise this is leading to the Locusts, but what could this discovery bring? Now, David Rizzi, executive director of LIGO, has said, quote, "What's really exciting is what comes next. I think we're opening a window on the universe, a window of gravitational wave astronomy," end quote. Kip Thorne, which is Caltech's Richard P. Feynman Professor of Theoretical Physics, emeritus, is also quoted as saying something nearly identical, that this discovery is opening a new window on the universe. Gravitational wave astronomy and new branches of quantum physics are interesting windows, but what if what if some of the other windows, that might be opened? Is it possible a dimensional window or door might be open that can't be closed? So that brings us back to the certain goals of some physicists, not all, actually not even most, but some that are in control and are deciding what happens with the machine and things like that. Their goals: to develop a gravitational communication system, which again sounds insane, but this is the kind of stuff that they talk about. There are steps towards that goal that must be taken by them. There's got to be steps. They can't just decide to create one of these things. So there's steps. So first would be the confirmed discovery of gravitational waves or gravitons themselves. Now that happened already 5 or 6 years ago. Next would be learning to repeat the detection in a lab by creating gravitons or gravity waves. They would do this by putting Einstein's general theory to the test direct.
Okay, guys, I didn't know this was going to be so scientific. So I'll keep going, though.
And experiment.
I want to see what he says about the locusts.
Now, once that's accomplished, there should be enough information to go on to learn how to manipulate the gravitons themselves. Now, interestingly enough, this detection of gravitational waves occurred in September of 2015, but wasn't officially announced until 6 months later on February 11th, 2016. Now, the reason is because they have to do testing. They have to make sure it's a legitimate discovery, and sometimes that takes time. But that does lead us to wonder what else has been accomplished right now and not yet announced, because that kind of thing happens often. A discovery will happen and it'll take months. It could even be longer, for all we know, for it to be announced. So could these discoveries spur on the opening of the abyss in Revelation chapter 9? Only time will tell for sure.
Here we go. This is what I was waiting for.
By the looks of it, we're not too far from knowing for sure. So this leads us to wonder what the world might look like after an interdimensional communication is established. We might have the answer in the prophetic book of Revelation from the prophet John. Revelation 9, 1-3 states, "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power." Now, the first thing to notice here is that this occurs when the fifth angel sounds. In my book, Unraveling the Multiverse, I explored the possibility of the number of cherubim faces in Ezekiel's vision representing spatial dimensions. And we absolutely will look at that in this episode a little bit later. But if we include time, it's correct to say that we are four-dimensional beings. Again, it goes back to that classification of dimensions that we talked about at the beginning. But you can classify it as that. We inhabit 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. So if you count it that way, we're 4-dimensional beings. Now, if you follow that logic, we might have a reference to a being of an extra dimension in the fifth trumpet of Revelation, 4 of space and 1 of time. So 4 of space and 1 of time. Fifth dimensional being. And again, so that equals 5. Just as if you add time, we're 4-dimensional, 3 spatial, 1 temporal. This angel could be 5-dimensional, 4 spatial, and 1 temporal. So I also write in Unraveling the Multiverse about the theory that when the rebellious angels fell from heaven, that they may have fallen to what we would call the 4th spatial dimension, which would be 1 dimension just above ours. Not literally above, but there's no other real word for it. It would actually be all around us. But the angel sounding the trumpet is likely not a fallen angel, but instead might be signaling that a fallen being is about to come into the picture. Because the rest of the verse of Revelation 9 states, quote, "And I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." So that's no ordinary star. Now, according to our modern vernacular, any star, literal star that would fall on the earth would utterly destroy the earth. End of story. We're all dead at that point. So there doesn't seem to be, but there does seem to be a connection between stars and angels. And at times the word star can actually represent an angel. And we see this alluded to in Revelation 1:20, which says, "The mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches." Now there, while it says angel, we don't necessarily know if angel is a spiritual being or just a human messenger, because angel really just means messenger. There are spiritual messengers and there are physical human messengers. But again, there does seem to be this connection between stars and angels throughout Scripture. Now we can also see the star is a being of some sort because of the words "unto him was given the key." So the star being referred to with the pronoun him shows that this is a person of some sort. Maybe not human, certainly not, because it's falling from heaven. That could be that it's a fallen angel, like literally fallen, rebelling against God, or it could be that it's sent from heaven with a message because it's a messenger, it's an angel. But it is a being, a person, either spiritual of some sort. So don't equate the word person with human. Person doesn't always mean human. Person just means like a conscious being of some sort. So this could be, a person, being, but something of 4 spatial dimensions rather than 3. Now, why am I saying 4 rather than 3? We are going to look at that. We have to go to Ezekiel for that, but we are going to look at that a little bit later. So just hold that in your mind. But this is this is most likely referring to a fallen angel because of the fallen description, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could just be an angel sent by God. So that's a little up in the air. Now, verse 2 tells us that the angel opened the bottomless pit with the key. That word key is interesting. It comes from the Greek word kleis and can be used as a metaphor for authority. So it might not be a literal key, but it might be authority. So in a sense, this fallen angel was given permission or authority to open the bottomless pit. And we also learn in Revelation 1:18 that Jesus Christ himself held the keys of death and hell. So most likely it was Jesus who granted this authority. It would have to be, right? Now, we may ask, why would Jesus give permission for a fallen angel, if it is a fallen angel, or even a non-rebellious angel, to open the bottomless pit? But if it was a fallen angel, why would he allow that? We find the answer in chapter 2, verses 2 through 11 in the book of Joel. And this is a little bit of a long section, but it's worth reading. So I'll read it now. Again, it's 2 through 11, book of Joel. "A day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains. A great people and a strong, there hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen, so shall they run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array. Before their face the people shall be much pained, all faces shall gather blackness. They shall run like mighty men, they shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks. Neither shall one thrust another, they shall walk every one in his path, and when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. They shall run to and fro in the city, they shall run upon the wall, they shall climb up upon the houses, they shall enter in at the windows like a thief. The earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And the Lord shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great, for he is strong that executeth his word. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? Now, we can learn a lot of truths from that passage, but for our purposes here, we only need to note a couple of things. First, as we'll see later in further detail, notice this army is described in many of the same ways as the locust army of Revelation 9, and very well could be the same. It might be. We don't know for sure, because again, we have to remember that fallen beings were originally obedient, created beings from God. You know, they were obedient. How much did their appearance change when they fell? We don't know for sure. So, but it's likely the very same army. And we also read in verse 8 of their immortality, that when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. That shows immortality. It shows that these are likely angelic in nature. Now, we don't know if these are the good guys or the bad guys, but with all the descriptions that are similar to the locusts in Revelation 9, it seems like these might be the bad guys. Although we also know that God does send the good angels too to execute his judgments. So it's still up in the air. You know, I don't know that for sure. When I wrote Unraveling the Multiverse, if I remember right, I believe I took the stance that these were fallen, that these were against God, but God was utilizing them, because he does do that sometimes in the scripture. He has utilized the enemy before. That doesn't mean that he practices evil or does anything evil, but again, God is in control of everything. These things are still under his control, and he can use them as he sees fit. There's even places where, you know, God's given permission for a supernatural being to go and be a lying spirit. So, you know, that kind of thing has happened before. It doesn't mean that God himself lies or practices in sin, but we also have, you know, what you sow, you will reap. That's like a principle in the Bible. If you sow lies into the world, you're going to get lies back. So a lot of that can be God's justice.
Diane, maybe it's God giving them a plague through the camel, because most camels are from the Middle East, so maybe he's doing that to them.
God's perfect, holy, and righteous judgment. So, given the description of the circumstances surrounding these beings, we have sun, moon, and stars darkened, clouds of thick darkness, etc. They seem to be the very same locust beings from Revelation 9. Again, there is an argument that says that in Joel these are the heavenly angelic army of God, and that could be too, or it could, you know, there's different ways it could play out, but they seem to be the same locust beings from Revelation 9. But also notice that Joel 2:11 says that this is the Lord's army. So how can this be? Again, like I said, there are times in the Bible where God will use the enemy for his own purposes. He's ultimately in control of these things anyway. He can use them however he sees fit. In the book of Exodus, we read that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 9:12. We also read later in Revelation chapter 9, quote, "And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men." So, as we can see there are times where the Lord absolutely will use the enemy to fulfill his own purposes. Those four angels bound at the Euphrates, those aren't good guys, because why would good guys be bound? You know, these are angels that are under some kind of judgment, and they're set loose. So the Lord absolutely does use the enemy sometimes to fulfill his own purposes, usually in the way of judgment. And the locust army is no different. So before they're unleashed into our world, this gravitational communication aspect becomes more obvious when we consider these prophecies. It's at least a possibility. All right. Like, I would not go and build an entire doctrine on this, but it's at least one way that this could play out. It's possible that the LHC at CERN will detect evidence of gravitons, which in turn could lead to a communication device to higher dimensional entities. And again, I know that sounds nuts, but there have been many physicists that have gone on record to say that they do want to try and communicate with higher dimensions. They want to first discover them and see if they're there. They want to probe them and explore, and they want to communicate. I don't know if it still is, but for a long time, that was right on CERN's website as one of their top goals. It was either CERN or it was the new particle collider that they were building in China, I believe. But one of the particle colliders, I believe I have it. I believe I wrote about it in Abaddon Ascending, a book that I wrote with Dr. Thomas Horn. But in that, me and Tom talked about it, and I think I have that quote in there. But one of the particle colliders. So this is a goal that these types of people have. Now, again, not every physicist is going to believe this. Most don't. Most just want to learn about God's creation. I mean, there are actually Christians that work at CERN. I'm good friends with one of them, at least. But so most of the people that work at CERN, I don't think have anything to do with this. But there are people in power. There are people that do have these goals, and they talk about them openly. Now, what particle but a graviton could best represent fallen angels? So if this communication device to a higher dimensional entity requires gravitons to operate, because gravitons can transcend dimensions, what better particle than a graviton to represent a fallen angel? We even have reference to falling, in effect caused by gravity, in the description of the
graviton. Isn't there a transformer named Graviton? Pretty sure there is. And we know that the transformers represent the morphing UFOs. You know how UFOs can morph? That's what transformers represent.
Star angel that opens the bottomless pit. So we can look at it there. Now, there's an Abaddon and Ezekiel antithesis that I want to get into. It's entirely possible that these locusts are the direct antithesis or just opposite of the cherubim Ezekiel saw in chapter 1 of his book. So the idea behind this is, for everything God has, Satan has an evil and inferior duplicate to that thing. So Satan has never had an original thought of his own. All he does is twist what God already has. So the Antichrist is an antithesis of of our Savior, of Jesus, of the Christ, the real Christ. So antithesis of Christ, Antichrist. Satan's never had an original thought of his own, so he borrows from God. Now, when we look closely at the description of these locusts and compare it to Ezekiel's vision, because remember, in chapter 1, Ezekiel saw the good guys, the throne guardians, the throne cherubim of God, and these are the good guys. But when we compare those cherubim, the good, non-fallen cherubim of Ezekiel's vision, to the locust, we actually see that they're complete opposites. They have similar characteristics, but the characteristics are twisted. They're opposite. So the locust army is very likely comprised of fallen cherubim. That's what I think these things are.
Wow.
They're most likely described as locusts because of the destructive role that they play, not necessarily because of their physical appearance. Which is
wow, that's a good pickup. It's not because of their appearance, it's because of their destruction, like locusts do. Wow.
Described in Revelation 9:7 as, quote, "And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle," end quote. Now, in my book Unraveling the Multiverse, I show that the cherubim seem to be an amalgamation of human and animal appearances, and we'll look at that a little bit later when we look at the faces of Ezekiel and see what is really going on there, what that might be representing. Other ancient cultures have seem to have witnessed these beings as well, and they wrote about them and even drew them in like wall reliefs and things. There's the Lamassu and Shadu of ancient Assyria, and those beings were described as having an animal body, like a bull or a lion, with wings and a human head. Now, in Ezekiel's vision of the cherubim, we see the opposite. Ezekiel describes animal heads atop human-like winged bodies. So it's like the bad guys are the direct antithesis of this. We also see in Ezekiel's vision that one of the faces is described as being half human, half lion, and bisected vertically. However, Revelation 9:7-8 says, quote, "And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions." Now, if they had faces of men like teeth, but they had teeth of lions, it would suggest also a half human, half lion face. But instead of being bisected vertically like Ezekiel's vision, like the good guys, this is bisected horizontally. Lions' teeth, faces of men. So that could be another attribute to show that these locusts are an antithesis to the heavenly cherubim that Ezekiel witnessed. Because again, in Ezekiel, and we will look at it a little later, but in Ezekiel, he said that like on the left half or on the right half, however he described it, but vertically on one side was a lion, on one side was a human. That is a vertical bisection, but here in Revelation, it's a horizontal bisection. And again, that's one of those things that we read over and we don't piece together, but when we do look at it, when we do piece it together, it tells us quite a bit about who these beings are. Now, Ezekiel also described the heavenly cherubim as carrying the throne of God on top of them. If you remember Ezekiel chapter 1, which again we'll look at, but if you just by way of just remembering, if you think back to what that vision was, and if you never read it, that's okay, because I can just explain it to understand this point. He saw 4 of these cherubim, and on top of them, they were carrying the throne of God. And this whole thing, this whole construct is God's chariot, his throne chariot. So just remember that they're carrying God on top of them. Now, Revelation 9:11 says, quote, "And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon." Now, a lot of times we focus on those names, Abaddon and Apollyon, but what did it say just before that? It says they had a king over them. And a lot of times we tend to think that that's like authority, like there's a king ruling over them. And it does mean that, but that word over, it actually comes from the Greek word epi, which can mean upon, as well as represent statements of authority. So there are times that the Bible uses the word epi to describe something physically on top of something else, without regard to authoritative position at all. So much how the heavenly cherubim were carrying the true God over them, these fallen cherubim seem to be carrying their false god and king Abaddon above them. It's a direct antithesis of the throne chariot of God. So
it's true, but isn't it, Diane? You've been told to stay away from something, you do the exact opposite.
Abaddon has a throne chariot too, but these things are being carried by his throne chariot is being carried by the fallen cherubim in Revelation 9. And for an example of that word epi, whenever Satan took Jesus on top of the temple, when it says that, when it describes that, it uses that word epi, on top of, so on the temple. It has nothing to do with authority. So it could be saying that, but it sounds like that Satan or Abaddon, I mean, likely a different being altogether, but Abaddon has a antithesis of God's chariot, of God's throne, and that's what's being described here in Revelation 9. So this idea links us back to what we talked about earlier, and I've written about before, the possible connections between CERN and Abaddon in ancient history. And there are connections to that. The very first chapter of Abaddon Ascending actually goes really in depth into that if you want more information on that. Now, as pointed out in my book Cherubim Chariots, and then later Unraveling the Multiverse, the ancient world likely had direct contact with fallen cherubim. I mean, they drew these things all the time and they described them. But again, they called them things like Lamassu and Shadu, and they're the antithesis, they're the opposite of what the good guys look like. So in the Bible, the good guys look like humanoid bodies with animal heads. In the ancient world, these Lamassu and Shadus, they are animal bodies with human heads. Really weird. It's a direct antithesis. It's an opposite. So it's possible that the book of Revelation is prophesying a return of these fallen creatures. And it's also possible, if interdimensional contact is made through the use of gravitons, that it'll be either these fallen cherubim or the king over them that humanity will actually be in contact with. So if CERN has anything to do with prophecy, this could be it. I don't know for sure that CERN does, but it might not even be CERN. Once this discovery is made, how to utilize gravitons, any private company could use that information and build something like this. So it might not even be CERN that does it, but it seems like eventually some type of communication is made. And we see echoes of this all throughout history. I think even, what was it? I think Thomas Edison maybe was trying to create like a ghost phone thing where you could call spirits of the dead. I mean, this kind of thing has been in the background of human psyche all throughout time. Humans have always wanted to communicate with other spirits and things. So why not use technology to try to do that? And I think that there are people that would, and being that gravitons can transcend dimensions, if once we get to the point where we can understand gravitons enough, why wouldn't people try to do that? Why wouldn't people use gravitons to try to communicate? It'd be easy to do if you can manipulate them. All you'd have to do, you could send a message by just altering the spin, and then you have like a 1 and a 0. You can do a binary code and send a string of gravitons, each with different spins, 1s and 0s, or a Morse code type of thing, and you can send that as a message, then just set up a receiver and see if something comes back. So there are ways that this could be done, and it's likely that people will try to do it. Now, whether that has anything to do with prophecy, I can't say for sure, but it seems like a possibility that we should keep our eyes on. Now, as I show in my book, Abaddon Ascending, again, that I wrote with Tom Horn, if you're interested, you can go to skywatchtvstore.com and get that. But the area where CERN is located today is thought to have been dedicated to that same false god, Apollyon, Apollo, Abaddon, in ancient times. And they actually had, when they were constructing it, they had to halt construction because they found all these artifacts and things dedicated to Apollo. So it could be that that dedication will manifest itself in the near future. So it's weird that at the same spot where CERN is right now, that is where this fallen being, Apollyon, was actually venerated and worshipped. And they actually had a spot at that location that they called the bottomless pit. So it's like it's too many connections, it's too many coincidences to just be coincidence. So we might actually see a modern day repeat of the Tower of Babel and a fulfillment of Zechariah 5 in our near future. And if you want a really interesting study, you should look that up. And I think I do actually have Bible studies on that somewhere online. But if not, just let me know and I'll dedicate. We'll do a whole Zechariah 5 study either here or on JPD Weekly. I think that would be a good thing to do. But the idea behind all of this is that it's possible the mechanism of opening the abyss, at least on the human physical side, is to open a communication system with gravitons and to breach this barrier between dimensions in order to explore what's there. And then while that's happening on the physical side, on the spiritual side, God is allowing humans to do this, and an angel is permitted to open the bottomless pit, thereby releasing these horrific fallen cherubim on the world. So it's sort of like God saying, all right, you want to contact extra dimensional entities that I clearly separated you for your own protection. You don't want my protection? Then fine, you'll get exactly what you want. Here's the false gods you keep going after. Let's see how they treat you. And then at that point, hell is literally poured out on earth. Now, of course, the bottomless pit and the release of the Locust prophecy in Revelation 9 might not have anything to do with CERN, so I don't want to create a spirit of fear around CERN and around particle colliders and stuff like that. I don't want to do that. Even if we as believers were here during this prophecy, and I don't personally believe that we will be, but even if we were, the prophecy says that this is only going to affect non-believers. So these things are not allowed to hurt followers of God. We don't have to fear these things. It's only those who reject God. So for us as Christians, there's nothing for us to worry about here. These things are the false gods that people have always rejected God for. And people are in this prophecy, people are getting exactly what they wanted. They're getting exactly the false gods that they keep worshiping. they're getting to communicate with their false gods, and that is their punishment, because these false gods are evil and they only want to destroy humanity. So if you belong to Jesus, this punishment is not for you. Even more, you'll get to communicate, you'll get to commune with your God as well, the real God. But instead of it being a horrific, abusive experience, it'll be a wonderful, beautiful experience, and it's exactly what you were created for. So, if you don't know Jesus today, you really should get to know him right now. Start a relationship with him. To get eternal life, all you got to do is trust in him. Just trust that he is the only way to heaven. And his death, burial, and resurrection, his blood can cleanse your sins. But all you got to do is trust in him. Change your mind about him. If you've been rejecting him or if you've been ignoring him, change your mind about that. Believe in him, pray, ask to take part in his promised salvation after this life passes. It's not by any works that you do that gets you to heaven. It's by what Jesus has already done. So Jesus has already paved the way. You just have to trust him for it. It's that easy. So one thing is for sure, you will die someday. And you don't want to run the risk of running into horrible beings like this in the afterlife or in the abyss or in hell. You want to make sure that you're protected. Amen. And that your entrance into God's eternal kingdom is secure. So today is the day to get that taken care of right now. Call out to Jesus, trust in him, and be spiritually born again in his name. Okay, now we do have a lot more to talk about, but we're going to do that in the members only section. So we're going to talk about the good guys. We're going to talk about...
Okay, guys, that was done. This guy, I showed his hell vision about a week ago, but apparently he went to heaven as well, which I didn't know. So this should be interesting.
I had no idea what an intercessor prayer was. I just prayed like I'm talking. This will probably help clarify some of the things and why I came back too.
Yeah.
Is that years later, a few years later, about 2.5, 3 years later, I was a Christian. I was very works oriented, and I did not want to go back to hell, so I was driven to keep myself saved. What can I say? I mean, I was like being propelled. I don't want to go back to that awful place, Lord. So what do you want me to do? Oh, I'm a musician. I'll join the praise band. Oh, they don't know how to do the soundboard. I do soundboard. So I'll do the soundboard. So I was in the praise band. I did soundboard in this Church of God. I attended this Pentecostal type church. And they had a new pastor come in. And so the old pastor left. So I just stayed on with the group and did that. And the pastor heard me pray and said, I want you to be my head intercessor. I had no idea what an intercessor prayer was. I just prayed like I'm talking to somebody because I know I'm talking to somebody. He's there.
Amen.
I mean, that sounds
Exactly
strange,
right.
but I pray. I know I'm talking to somebody. I know that I feel the presence of God. And sometimes it grows dim, but it never has ever gone away. And even right now, I can feel the presence of God. And in me, around me, I just know that he's there. So when I pray, and so he heard me pray, and I am talking to somebody. Doesn't everybody? Mm-hmm. And so he made me head intercessor. I was young and dumb. I didn't know anything, but these people were praying, and what they were seeing in the spirit was what I was seeing. So I thought, this is weird. And I'm very intellectual, very geeky in my thinking, and I want to test everything. Is this real? This is how I am. And so I go, wow. So we just pray. I learned from them how to do intercessory warfare, like spiritual warfare from these people. They're older than me, wiser than me, and I was humble enough just to listen to them because I didn't know anything. And I just let them do their thing. I learned from them. It was basically how I ran the whole thing. But anyway, from all that experience, I was just working. And so that we had a revival meeting, 4 or 5 day, 4-day revival meeting coming up on like a 3-day weekend or something. So start Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so I did the soundboard, I was doing the music. So on Sunday, I was doing soundboard, and they were just going and going. I thought every night they were baptizing 30 to 50 people. That's how many people were getting saved. And then they had some class in the day where they teach them about new believers and water baptism. See if they want to get water baptized. If they want to get water baptized, come back that night. Or if they got saved, at that night, they can go get baptized immediately. So, 30 to 40, 50 people. I think 54, I think it was on Saturday night. So we never got out of there early. So on Sunday, I thought, well, things are winding down. People are getting tired. I'm getting tired. So there'll probably be about 3 or 4 people who will be baptized. That's what the pastor said. Okay. And I have to get up to work real early. So sure enough, we had 30 people baptized. I got out super late. I had a 45-minute to an hour drive. I lived out in the prairie land and outside of Fort Collins in a trailer park, small trailer park out in the middle of the prairie, and took a long time to get home. Driving back, I'm mad, I'm angry, I was cussing, I wasn't in a holy mood. I got to get sleep. It's going to be 2 hours. When I got home, I got to let my dog out. My dog was out. I let my dog back in, fed my dog, then put the dog back out for dog duty stuff. Dog come back in, my German Shepherd, settle down. I go, well, if I can just rest for a little bit, my alarm clock's set. The light will come in from the sun, come and wake me up at 5 in the morning, as it usually does out here at that time. And I can get up, I'll just go to work. I just want to try to rest for a couple hours. So I laid on my bed, and I was not in a holy mood. I was not thinking about Jesus. I was just angry. I was mad because I was inconvenienced. I was burnt out. I'm doing everything, and I was just burnt out. So I laid on my bed, trying to earn my way to heaven, keep myself saved, or whatever you want to say it. I was working my way to be saved, or to stay saved. Stay saved. I work my way to stay saved. I got to do all this work. And God might like me. And so all of a sudden I closed my eyes, and I heard a booming voice. And I literally heard this. It says, awake, arise, stand to your feet. And I said, shut up, shut the blankety blank blank up. That's what I said. And then I opened my eyes, it was pitch black. That was a nice dream, but my dog was really happy, flapping her. She's at the foot of the bed, and she's wagging her tail, and she's getting happy. And then I said, calm down. And so she calmed down a little bit. So I laid back down again. It happened 2 other times. I had the same response. The third time it happened, each time I threw the covers over my head, threw the covers off, and I stood up. I got out of the bed, and I go, oh my God, I missed the rapture. That's what I thought. I opened up the side door of the trailer, and my dog stayed there like somebody was there. And I looked outside, no, I don't think I missed the rapture. Take me. And I didn't say that, but I thought I missed the rapture. So I opened the door, and this peace came in the room, and I felt the Lord's presence. It's real strong as peace. And I looked at my dog. I'm not kidding you. There was somebody petting my dog because that German Shepherd's ears are pointed, was going down, and she was super happy. Just sitting there like she was in dog heaven there. She was so happy as ever seen my dog. Just sitting there, really obedient, not barking, so unusual for a dog. Slightest noise, up barking. But I laid that back down because I heard a still quiet voice. I knew it was the Lord's voice. He said, do you remember how you left before? I said, yes, Lord. So I lay back on my back, and boom, I was gone. I went as in the black void, heading toward the same light, hearing the same music. This time I wasn't being judged. I was going home. I can't describe how the feeling I got. It was like I got almost a cleansing or a purification, listening to all the stuff about God's character traits, his nature, and things, how he does things. A lot of it I can't share on, but it's just, came back to where I saw Jesus before. This time I saw heaven, the walls of heaven, of the current heaven, and my feet stood before me again. I fell down again as soon as I saw him. And someone picked me up. I think it was the Lord picked me up this time, but he did not have a hood over his face like he did before. And people go, oh, what did Jesus look like? Well, I take you to Mark chapter 16. And when he appeared in a different form to the disciples, all I could say is I saw one like the Son of Man.
Yeah, and I didn't know he had a heaven vision. Otherwise, I would have played it when I played his hell vision last week. But already it's sounding good.
Would be the Lord of glory 1 minute. A nondescript Jewish person you would probably not pay attention to somebody. He was just one like the Son of Man. That's all I can tell people what he looked like. I get people mad at me because I can't describe what he looks like other than his.
I'm Jake Foley. I'm a gambler.
He changed, and he welcomed me, and so we walked up this path, and as he's talking to me, I intuitively know to pay attention to all signs, symbols, everything like that. Walk by this beautiful wall, and why is there a wall around heaven? Why is there going to be one in and why is that? Well, we human beings, Moses answers that question. When he went up to the mountain, he took 70 elders with him, and they had supper and they met God up there, but they only saw his foot. They had supper there on Numbers chapter 24 with Moses, and Joshua went a little bit further up, and Joshua stayed a little lower, and Moses went up and got the 10 Commandments and all that. So Moses always wanted to see God's full manifest presence, because God always reveals himself in a theophany. And Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There's this Father and the second person of the Divine Trinity, third person. There's a one God, three persons. I can't explain it. I understand it, but I can't explain it because I saw it up there. And I saw how God can be three persons yet one. It's remarkable. It's like I won't get into the doctrine of the Trinity right now, but anyway, I'm sold on it. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I can teach on it as much as I can, but probably don't do justice. But so the full manifestation of God is totality, is total combined form. Would be too much for the human being mortals to handle. They would die. Well, in God himself, you can't see my full presence, you'll die. And so we have a wall in heaven, so his full manifestative presence doesn't consume everything before an appointed time when it's able to handle it. Because he's that just. You just don't know how just God is. And so that came to me, and we walked up to this big pearl, and I came up to this big pearl, and these angels were coming out of, and the angels were going out doing assignments. So I always came away from that knowing that they came from what I call a heavenly council. This is before I ever even heard of Michael Heiser, and this was 1983-ish, okay? And I just knew there's a heavenly council, and they're doing tasks for the Lord. They're answering prayers. They're helping somebody. They're saving somebody's life from an accident, and they're going out doing that stuff. We walked by them, and Jesus was in front of me, so we came there, and he showed me it looked like a big white pearl with blue streaks going through it, but the blue was living. It was like floating through it. And so we walked through the narrow gate through it, and I just remember looking at the walls. I can see it right now as I was walking through there. Now, if I was taken to heaven, if it was an open vision, I'll let people decide, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not here trying to make myself out somebody important because of it. Because most of what I saw in heaven is for me, and me only, and I don't talk about it. But the reason I saw it was to calm me down about seeing where I was, that I don't have to work myself to stay saved. That's what the whole purpose of it was. And so I walked into this, in this pearl through a gateway, and I noticed it looked like nails chiseled it and spear point. And the imagery came to me, and I was walking through there. I got a download of the cross like I've never got before.
Wow.
And I've been preaching it ever since. Is that we only teach a small, glorious, small, itty bitty segment of the cross. What we fail to identify is Jeremiah. Go back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 17. Who can know iniquity in the heart? Man does not know it. Only God can expose the iniquity. How is he going to do that? Through Jesus Christ. Here's Jesus Christ. People are plotting to kill him, his own people. So, and then he got somebody to betray him, Judas. So when it comes to me and I read about those events, I'm going, I ain't done that. Who have I betrayed? Who have I plotted against? Boy, I can name a few. And then growing up. And then he was in the garden. And all his friends abandoned him. How many times I've abandoned somebody? I'm even guilty of that to this day sometimes. And it hurt me tremendously. And it's like, wow. And then how many times I put people on trial to have a false witness against? You know, I put a burden, a cross on somebody they can't bear and have someone else carry it. How many times have I done that? How many times I've mocked? How many times I've beaten? How many times I was like Herod? You know, they take Jesus to Herod and say, why don't you perform for me, God, so I can believe in you? Why don't you do this tap dance and I might believe for you? If you agree with how my idea of God, of what love should be, you let everybody into heaven, prove it. Dance for me, dance for me. How many times we all done that? That's iniquity in the heart. So I was walking through that tunnel, that was coming to me. And then we got near the end of it, and getting near the end of it, then there's Jesus on the cross. I could see this. And he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And boom, that way entrance into heaven was made. So whoever puts their faith and trust in there, who sees their iniquity, they become so grateful that God saved them because they don't deserve it. That is true conversion. And that's what I teach. I try to show people what they do to each other, their friend. And I should show them their iniquities and define what sin is. And what Jesus died for is our substitutionary atonement. He hung suspended between God and man, took our wrath for putting him on the cross. Is a love beyond I can even comprehend. And it just blows me away that why would anybody do that, knowing what I know about human nature? And he did it. He took the wrath of God on our behalf. How can God impart sin if he's sinless? Well, through human agents, through the law. Jesus fulfilled all the law. That means the high priest would have to speak their sin over Jesus. They have to lay their hands on Jesus. Anybody, the whole population would have to do that too. And they shouted, crucify, crucify, give us Barabbas. I mean, all that shows how the Lord was able to impute sin on the sinless sacrifice of Jesus. We did it. And then he punished Jesus in our place for doing that, slaying goodness, kindness, and mercy, and trying to, we just ruined paradise. We just ruined everything. And he said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Then the next thing he said is, why hast thou forsaken me? For Psalms 22. And the answer is just below the cross. You divide my garments, you steal from each other, you mock, you shoot the lip up, you abandon, you betray. That's why I abandon you, mankind. But I offer a way of salvation. My son paid it all. And none of you deserve it. And how can I fight a love like that? I can't. The only thing I know to do is fall on my face and say, forgive me, Lord, save me. So I came out of that, going through that tunnel, that's what came to me. That's the most profound thing that came to me, is that thing about the cross. So I come to the end of it. We came into this open meadow. I call it a field of reunion. And when we came out, all these people were coming out behind me too. And I could see what was transpiring. And then Jesus is standing there. People would say hi to Jesus and everything. And I came out, and these people were meeting loved ones who'd gone on. They're Christians or believers who've gone on before the Lord. And one of the most remarkable things that I always remember is how this guy came out from behind me, walked around Jesus, and he just walked on, and he was so surprised to see his dad greeting him, because I knew what happened to him because I just had that insight. And his dad was not saved, and he was tired of witnessing to his dad, and they got into a huge argument. And his daddy wanted nothing to do with Christianity and told him so many words to get out. And he said, okay, Dad, I'll never see you again, and walked away. He was a believer, but he just got mad, just fumed. Didn't go to his dad's funeral or anything like that because his dad eventually got cancer. And he was surprised to see his dad there. And his dad came up to him and said, son, I'm so glad you told me about Jesus, because on my deathbed, I remember what you said. And they cried, they wept, they embraced. All the animosity, all the stuff, all the father and son conflict was erased. That's why I call it a field of reunion. And that's what I was seeing, people being reunited with loved ones that, have gone on to be with the Lord. Some of them were more happy. But what got me the most also was seeing people who lost little kids, infants and stuff, or little tykes got hit by a car or whatever. And they would see their child coming up to them and grow up in front of them. And they'll say, hi, Mom, hi, Dad. And it was like this reconciliation thing. And I saw women who gave abortions are now Christians. They live all their life with this guilt and shame. And then they see the baby crawling and know it's their kid, and they grow up and say, hi, Mom, we got all eternity here. Let's go.
Wow.
They're crying, weeping, not it's happiness, pure joy. Because sometimes you get so joyous, all I can do is cry. And at the time, it was such healing of the heart that was going on there. There was no animosity, no hatred. It was like everything cleaned up before you go into heaven. This field, I call it the grand field of reunion, like a big meadow. Everything perfect. On some of my videos, I found a film or a photo of Kauai. I've been to that same spot. And they did the light filtering really good with the flowers there. And I just chose that because that's the closest what I could give you what kind of heaven looks like. But the flowers are bigger and everything's more perfect than the picture. But the lighting is and the ambiance of that sets just reminds me of heaven. The only picture I've seen that gets it close. And so in some of my videos, I use that a lot. And so it was the light of the Lord. The Lord gives heaven its light. It's a land of liquid love, but it's not love like we think. It's a firm but fair love, and it's all wrapped up and explained by God's character traits. God is loving. God justice is governed by his love, and his love governs his justice. His righteousness is governed by his love, and his love governs his righteousness. There's this dynamic between everything that you see. And that's what I was seeing in this field of reunion. So we walked on through there. And like the Apostle Paul said, there are things in heaven that are not lawful to utter. And they deal primarily with the full character traits of God and some of the things you see there that are, you cannot utter them. You couldn't even try. You do it. It would be unlawful. Just, there's no human words would just disdain it. I mean, even if you could, you'd get some Nimrod here on earth who try to sell it to make a buck.
Right.
Wow.
That ain't me. And so when I read that part that Paul said, I go, well, I can understand that. That's how I felt. And that's why I delayed ever telling anybody the Lord took me to heaven, because most of it was just personal for me to calm me down and saying, Brian, you are eternally secure. I'm not going to drop kick you because you made a mistake. You don't have to work so hard, dummy. That's the type of thing he was showing me. And how can I ever, I was like, wow. And he showed me saying, and one thing that was struck me, and I thought it was so natural and not one worry whatsoever, is that I saw all these people there. Someone would come up to me and they say hi or whatever. They always went to Jesus. Can we tell him who we are? Can we talk to him? And he was no. I had no problem with that. I was not allowed to talk to one person in heaven, not one solid soul, and I was fine. I walked by them, I could hear them talk. People were in classes. I don't know how else to say it. There are just sitting around in a field somewhere, and maybe somebody, a Bible figure of some sort, somebody who you probably read about and that Paul wrote about in one of the last chapters of any of his letters that he commends for helping him. And you hear them talk and tell their story, and the people could see it happening.
Wow.
There's an old hymn that says, tell me a story about Jesus, engrave it upon my heart by Fanny Crosby. That's a great song, and it's a great hymn. And that kind of captures that. It's like, tell me a story about Jesus, and they're telling it, and you're seeing it, and I just walk by. That's what Jesus. They all recognize Jesus, and it was not anything, and they know who he is, and is I don't know, and the peace and the love and the kindness and the joy there, and the Lord took me to a place, and Jesus said, "Do you want to go to the city, or do you want to see the country?" You already knew my answer. I said, "I want to see the countryside." I live in urban areas all my life. I'm tired of it. I like my grandparents' farm. I like being.
I would have rather seen the city. I'd like to see the buildings, how they're made.
Up there where I could see the stars at night, something like that. He already knew that. So we walked through a forest, and I saw people taking care of the trees. I saw people taking care of different things in heaven. And when I get mad, people get mad at me when I say this. I say there's animals in heaven, and they don't make fertilizer. They don't have the same. They don't do the same function that they have here. But there's animals in heaven. There are definitely horses in heaven because Jesus is going to be riding back on one.
Right.
So there are animals in heaven and birds, tons of birds. I've never seen birds like this.
There you go, Han. There's animals in heaven. Although we already knew that.
Well, God created them because there's joy, and they've got people who love animals, and they're going to be up there taking care of the precious things of God. You're going to be taking care of, maybe you have a hobby, you don't even know why you like to cook or clean or something. Well, you've got the banquet hall, you got a city to take care of, and that's what you're going to be doing, and it'll be like a working vacation. That's all I got to say. It's a very busy place. And you are in your full element. You're in the full fulfillment of what God created and designed humanity for. And that's what heaven was like. And this profound love of describing his character traits. And it was like we were created in the image and likeness of God, meaning that we were to govern earth according to, that he designed, according to the fruit of the Spirit. That's all I can say. Love, joy, peace, righteousness, holiness. That's how we're supposed to govern each other's lives. But sin got in the way. It had to come so we can learn the lesson so we don't make mistakes. I won't get into all that. That's a little too deep theology there. But we're here. We got to learn lessons. Some people don't like that. I know when I was an atheist, I didn't like that answer either. But it's there. Read some Michael Heiser books or something. I'll let him explain it to you.
Yeah. And then it's, it fascinates me that you bring, because I actually had not heard that part of your story yet before today. And I remember when I first got back into Christianity, and then for a long time, I had a similar experience that you did with trying to work for my salvation. I was just almost driven crazy with the idea that I might lose my salvation. I might not be saved. How do I know? How can I really know? And I would always be like praying and saying, Lord, I don't deserve a sign, and I don't even feel like I should be asking for one, but I need to know. And just real briefly, he actually did answer that prayer and gave me one small sign. I heard a single voice from inside of me, but it wasn't me, from inside of me singing, just a single voice. Couldn't hear any words. I don't remember the tune or anything like that, but I was laying in bed and I heard that. And I didn't know what it meant. So the next day, I had just gotten a Strong's Concordance, and the next day I was just looking. I knew about angel singing and stuff, but I when that happened, I got the sense it was God, and I never remembered any Bible verses about God singing. There's one in Zephaniah, and it's funny because the way it's worded, in Zephaniah, it's talking about Israel and stuff. So it's originally when it was written, it wasn't meant to be applied this way, but it was the way that it's worded, it's like God used that to show me something, because it says I'll save you out of the midst, and there it was I felt him in the middle of me, inside me, and so there was just a bunch of stuff in there that to me was okay, well, now I know. But still, even after that, I kept getting plagued with just this worry that well, maybe you were saved then, but maybe not now, a year later or something, and I make a mistake. And it's because I never really had the doctrinal, just theological backing of what the Bible actually says about salvation. And that's what I really needed. I needed the meat. I only had the milk at the time. I really needed the meat. So, years later, God had to spend some time with me preparing me to accept what the Bible actually says, because I was convinced, people can lose their salvation. Like, I was convinced of it. I'm not anymore. I don't believe in that anymore. I think that is such a destructive thing that's being taught in the church, and it just, all it does is drive people crazy. But when you look at what the Bible actually says, actually one of the best teachings I've heard on this, it's long, but Christians need it, because I know if I went through that, I'm not the only one, and I know there are Christians listening to this now that worry about that. The best teaching I've heard on it so far is Andy Wood's soteriology series, which people can find for free on YouTube, so there's no excuse to not watch it. It is like 50 parts long, but he goes through literally every single Bible verse and shows that the Bible verses that a lot of people try to use to say you can lose your salvation, it's when you look at it in context, it's about something else. And if you are a believer in Christ, like just like Brian said, if you are a believer in Christ, you are eternally secure. You are now in what's called a process of sanctification, which means, you're trying to live more Christ-like. You're going to make mistakes. God knew that. God still died on the cross for you, knowing that you were going to make those same mistakes post-salvation, post-accepting Christ. He knew all that. And he still died for you anyway. Scripture says that. So you are, just like Brian said, you are eternally secure. You don't have to worry about losing your salvation if you sin too much, or like if you're on the road and you fall into the flesh and cuss a guy out of road rage and then get in a car accident and die, because you have some unrepentant sin because you cussed or something and die. Like all of that it's not biblical. You are eternally secure if you're in Christ. All of your sins, past, present, and future, have been forgiven. And so I love that experience, because you're one of the very few, Brian, that have had these experiences and actually.
Small, shop it all interest free with a Latitude Gem Visa credit card with 6 months interest free on everyday purchases of $250.
And actually come away with it with what the Bible actually says about salvation, heaven, hell, all this stuff. Most people, and probably for the reason that we talked about earlier, because they don't see enough of it, or most people, they come away with it with universalism or annihilationism. Well, if somebody's really just that bad, then God will just wipe them out of existence, even though there is nothing in the Bible to support that. But that's just kind of what they come away with it. And it's like they rely more on their experience than they do on what the Word of God says. You're one of the very few where you have, and like you said, after you had your experience, you did years of research, and you defined your experience by the Word of God, not the other way around. I've never heard you interpret the Word of God through your experience first. You always have put the Bible first, and you say, years later I found out that this is what that meant. And so I really appreciate that about you. And I kind of got off on a rabbit trail there, but was there anything else?
Go right ahead.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say about having, like, what was how did the whole experience end?
Okay, that's pretty much. I'll go ahead and I came through, and one of the things I learned there was John chapter 10. He's not going to let you go out of his hand. He's got you in his hand, and the whole thing is he's sanctifying us.
I've
yes,
never
we
heard
make
of Andy
mistakes and
Woods.
stuff, but if you're truly born again and you're truly saved, and the context of scriptures will verify
And can you send me the link to Andy Woods, please?
that.
Yeah.
And they do. If you're truly saved, you are not going to be wanting to go out and sin. Yeah, you might do it, but you're not, all of a sudden you go out and you say you slipped in, you say, I'm going to go get a 6-pack, and you get sloppy drunk, and and you feel guilty after doing that, and you'll repent, and you probably never pick it up or do it again, because the Lord will put a guilt trip on you and cause you to, that's what I mean. Some people think, oh, you're teaching greasy grace. I do not teach greasy grace at all. I don't teach that. I mean, I'm talking sanctification. I'm glad you brought that out. People need to know that the Lord sanctifies us. Yes, we make mistakes. Yes, we can slip and fall, but that is not a lifestyle. They're different. The people who are now, a lot of people in the church world, they come in and they don't even know the gospel. They don't even know what they're doing, and they call themselves Christian, but there's no reason for them to change. They're still going to the bar. They're still hanging out with the wrong people. They're still doing the same stuff, thinking they're going to make it to heaven. No, I don't think those people are saved. I think there's a biblical standard for that. So I don't teach greasy grace. Josh doesn't teach it either. I'm just going to let people know that, because I know I'm going to get hate mail for it. And you will too.
Yeah, that's what the truth does, though.
That's what it does. But nothing I saw in heaven, I'll kind of wrap it up, was how beautiful the place was, and that we were designed to take care of the precious things of God. And I'm writing a book, and I got permission to go ahead and finish it, because I stopped it. I stopped it at a certain point. I'm 2/3 done, and I'm just going to go ahead and finish it. It won't take me long. Now I kind of, because there's some things you can't write about, and I just don't want to. I just stopped. And it's okay. If this is really important, I'm supposed to, then the Lord's going to have to motivate me. So he motivated me. So one of the things that I will mention in the book will be an area that I saw in heaven. And
thanks, Hannah. Just sub to him.
so Jesus was walking in front of me, came to this place. All of a sudden, Jesus was there, but he wasn't there. I can't explain it. He was there, but he wasn't. I was not allowed to go any further. I was like on the border. And there was
just that link looks interesting. Death and the afterlife. Just that very first link looks interesting, Han.
This big field. I look over to my right, and there's this huge angel, and he was a reddish bronze color sitting there. He had four, and his human face was sitting before me, just like Ezekiel described, and there were the other heads' faces on him. And he's just standing there, and he's watching. And he was a magnificent angel. I wasn't afraid of him, and I saw an angel like that walking down the street, and I was unsaved, I'd be scared spitless. But I wasn't afraid of the angel. But he was this being. He was big, tall, and it was natural. I looked over, and I was not allowed to go any further than this. But this huge field, huge area, innumerable company of angels singing and praising God. And people were there too, but I was not allowed to go any further. It was cool. And down in the way off down there, there was this big, brilliant light emanating from there. And there were four beings, but only could see three beings, and their wings would cover the light. But the light was so bright, it was shining out from amongst the beings, the angels, or whatever they were, or the cherubim, we would call them. And you could see the silhouette, but the light was so bright. And it was in a garden, Josh. It was the most beautiful garden. And I'm going, wow. Then all of a sudden, I heard from Skywatch TV, you guys talking about the Divine Council, and it was in a garden. I'm going, oh my God. It was like a light clicked on. And it's like, that's it. And I know what I saw is found in the Bible, because it talks about in Daniel, talks about in Revelation, not in the same context. I don't have any revelation whatsoever from it, nothing. I just saw it for an instant, and it was beautiful. And this is, God involves himself with his created beings who have intelligence, because he knows what he wants done. And so he sits there and he says, well, this is what I want done. Shoot me a plan. What do you think? And they come up and they bat around, and then, yeah, you two go do it. Yeah, you go do it. And that's how it works.
That's amazing.
If I would have tried to tell this earlier, before the time, before it was actually made known, people probably think I was nuts. But everybody thinks of the throne room or whatever as inside of some big building, but it's in a big, beautiful garden. I mean, it's more beautiful than heaven itself. It's in heaven, the current heaven, but I can't describe how beautiful and how the hedges were shaped. And how immaculate, how green, how perfect, how much life was there, and how much praise was going on, and all the angels there. And I can't describe it other than that. And so as soon as all of a sudden I heard the Lord speaking to me, I turned around, we walked away, and instantly I was back where I was, and I wasn't allowed to see it anymore. So Jesus was there before me, so we walked on, saw these big mansions, and they reminded me of geometric shapes, sort of like a Pueblo Indian make, but there was gold stucco. That's all I gotta say. And these big mansions, these were estates like the Biltmore. If you've ever been to the Biltmore in grand estate, 5,000, what was that, one time 5,000 acres, and there's even little towns and stuff on it. That would be like where what Jesus means when he says, I go prepare a place for you, a mansion. It's a grand estate. And so I saw these grand estates there and all these beautiful things and all these gold stucco buildings of geometric shapes and design, totally beautiful. Saw bread ovens there, which would be representing the bread of life or the bread of word, the word of God, and feeding the people of God, you know, on earth with the bread from heaven. I can't describe that, but this stuff I saw. It just came to my mind as we walked by these places. Saw a big vineyard with these huge grapes on it, and I always think that I wonder if those were the grapes of the vine of God's wrath that's going to be poured out, or if that's what's being grown. I don't know. I mean, I just walked by it and saw it, and that's what always came to my mind at the time too. But Jesus, and we walked on, came to a place, and I call it the tributary of the river of life, because most tributaries flow into a river. The river of life, the tributary, the water flows the opposite. It comes out. And the river of life is exactly how I think it's Ezekiel describes it. They measured it. It's 1,000 cubits wide. It's huge. So the creeks or the streams that are tributaries that branch out from it, you know, they can be any various sizes. So the one I saw was kind of small, and there were kids playing in it, and Jesus got in the water with them. I'm not kidding you. And start playing, they're kicking water on it. Then they just splashed me. And some things came off of me, and a lot of the fear and torment of seeing hell left me. I don't know how to describe this. People think, oh yeah, you're nuts, but that's, and I got joyous because I got water splashed on me and Jesus. Nothing to do with baptism, folks. It was just having fun in the water. And I saw a side of Jesus I never thought existed. He loves people. He was the life of the party. I mean, he could tell good, clean jokes. He would be somebody you want to sit down with. That's why sinners like to invite him over to their place. He related to you. And he was firm but fair. He didn't mess around with stuff. I'm just saying. If there was a demon there, he's going to cast them out. I mean, he's going to set people free. What about doing good and justice and all that stuff? And I saw an aspect of Jesus I never saw him there, and saw how good he was. And he wasn't this image that I got from religion where I had to work to earn my salvation.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I got it covered, Brian. You're mine. Now, if you do mess up, I'll chasten you. Mm-hmm. I'll take you to the woodshed because I love you, and I've been to the woodshed many times. And I appreciate that because I know he loves me every time I go to one, but I go to them less now. There's always a chance, so I'm not that dumb to say I'll be free of that, but I'm just saying, you know. And so we walked away, and it was like we came to the spot, and I saw a guy fishing in a tributary there. And I guess this would be my spot because I'm near this guy. I never knew who this guy was. I speculated and I talked about it. It could be this person or that person. And then my aunt showed me a picture of my grandfather at 30 years old, because everybody's about 30 years old, perfect. No flaws, no gray hair, no bad hair days. You're perfect. You're just how you're supposed to be. Men and women alike. But tell you what, there's no sex in heaven, okay? There's no need for gender, but you still retain your physical features of your gender, but you have the parts are not there. I don't know how to explain it. You still look like a man, the woman still looks like a woman, okay? But no procreation needed. That's all I gotta say. Hallelujah. No temptations. No. Whatever. Some people be glad to hear that. But anyway, the Bible teaches that anyway. So anyway, and so we're looking at this guy, and then when my aunt sent me a picture years later of him, I go, that was my grandfather. Wow. My grandfather was a fiery Methodist minister. His name is embedded in a wall of a church that he helped plant in Johnson City, Tennessee, in a fiery Methodist church back then. Someone took a picture of it and showed me. And and then he was a revivalist. He went to Los Angeles Bible Institute. He was born in California. Irish, not Irish, but Scottish descent. That's where I get some genetic issues from that. But anyway, I won't go into that. But from that, so
Means drinking.
he always, went to the Los Angeles Bible Institute, and the dean or the president of the school was R.A. Torrey.
Oh, okay.
And so he was born in 1877. And so he was there during Azusa Street. And so if you really do an honest study of Azusa Street, yeah, there were tongues and Mr. Seymour and all that, but it affected a mile strip of downtown Los Angeles. Methodists were at one end, Baptists were over here. Some of these people did not like the tongues, but they all met there, and the same phenomena occurred on Azusa Street. So it's not just confined to Mr. Seymour. It was an outpouring of God's Spirit. So I know my grandfather was involved probably in the Methodist part. After that, he went to the Modoc tribes, and the Modoc tribes just had a war with and so it's be about 10 or 15 years after the Modoc War in the 1890s there and all that. So he went up there and preached, very dangerous. And then came to the Nez Perce tribes, then came to Cheyenne, the Cheyenne Agency, they called it at the time, in South Dakota, then came down to Tennessee. And so little did I know that years later I would be going to the Cheyenne River Reservation, which is formerly known as the Cheyenne Agency. And since 1911, in 2011, 2011 to current date, I was ministering there. Hopefully I can go back, but my other car broke down. Don't have it anymore. I only have one car, so it's hard for me to get there, but I'm trying to get there and get up there and see the people. And so I've been up there. I never thought of that. So all that kind of tied in there when I put it all together. That was my grandfather. And when my grandfather died, he was in the Spanish-American War, but he was in his old folks home. It was early 60s, 63. He was 90-some years old. He saw me, and this place stunk horrible, urine and feces smell. And so he grabbed me and started shaking me, and he was praying probably in Nez Perce or something. And he was praying over me. And the nurses were fighting him off. He's spitting peas all over me because a mouthful of peas, and scared me as a little kid. And like you're gonna have to pull them off. I remember that. And so he prayed for me. So I go, that is the guy who prayed for me. That's my grandfather.
Wow.
I only know him as an old man dying. That's all my only memory of it. He was a different generation, a lot harsh, very austere. I got a list of my aunt and cousin compiled his sermon notes. And I go, wow, we almost teach the same. It's like, and it's just incredible. But anyway, that's kind of what I saw. Then after that, we went to, he asked me, it's time to go through the city. We went to the city, where everything is. And you travel in heaven as fast as you want. It seems you go to, even a slow amble is still fast. We just like slow amble. But other people, different modes of transportation. But anyway, to travel, you can travel at the speed of thought, whatever. Next thing I know, we were in the city, and we walked in a building that I can't describe how in the world it could stand up. It defies the laws of physics here. But it's this big, long building, and the tables were set low, and people were preparing it. And it was a banquet hall. And people would be sitting and reclining, not sitting at a table like we are used to, and they're getting ready for a wedding feast. We walked through it, one into the other, and it was huge. And I don't even know why we did. I don't have any special revelation of that other than that's what it reminded me. But what stuck in my mind was the people who enjoyed decorating and cooking, and they were all busy getting ready.
Was there any way to tell how clse they were to being done?
No, I don't.
I know, I'm joking.
I wish I knew. I didn't get anything like that. Not at all. All I got was this was for me, so I could calm me down about that. But anyway, we walked out of there, and then we got to a point back near the pearly gate there where we came in at, and he turned around and showed me what I'm saying, that I can't add anything to it other than what the book of Revelation says. It looked like a big cube being prepared. And that was that's all I will say, because it's all described in the book of Revelation. It was being prepared and worked on in aim for looking at. It was beautiful. I can't even describe it. And I won't. I'll leave that part and let John cover that. I just saw it real briefly. And I always come back as, how long is that? When is that going to be ready?
Yeah.
I have no answer, Josh. No answer. No answer at all. No answer. No. It wasn't there for that reason.
Sure.
It was like, it was sort of like, why he showed me that was, this is for you. You're not going to lose your salvation, dummy. That's why it was for me, because, and probably for other people, you feel like you work your way and you make some mistake. Well, God knew you were going to make it before you were born. Just ask him why you made it. Let him heal your broken heart that caused it. Let him reveal it to you. Stay in the Bible. Don't ever turn away from the Bible. Let him explain the Bible to you. Let him expose what's in your heart. Let him heal the past wounds and hurt that need to be healed, so you're not enslaved to whatever it is keeps you doing that. And so that's one thing I say. So I came back went back through the pearly gate. I went back down the pathway by the wall, and again stood on the rock where we came at, and he spoke to me some more. He blew on me, and I just went back through the void, floated back into my body, woke up, the sun beating on my face, the birds were out there singing, my dog's happy, and I got up fully refreshed, and I felt so good. I got to work, the work building grounds maintenance at Local Rewards when I first came to Fort Collins. Got into there, and the first thing is my supervisor said to me, Brian, you're glowing. Who did you sleep with? And nobody. I'm going, that's how the world thinks, Josh.
Yeah.
So I had some sort of glow coming out of me for 3 days that people commented on constantly. But I look in the mirror, I look like my old, normal, ugly self. I didn't look like I was glowing. But the other people go, you're glowing. What happened? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. You wouldn't believe me if I told you.
Right.
So I just kept this quiet. I kept this quiet. I didn't know what to do with it. And then when I start talking about it, and it goes back to Isaiah chapter 61, which helps people. The Spirit of the Lord is upon you. Well, Jesus gave us the Holy Spirit upon us. What? To give good news to those who've been crushed in their spirit, and heal the brokenhearted, set free the captives who are just in this repeating cycle of sin, and those who are bound to something can be like in a prison. They can be free from the limbo prison. And give them the oil of joy for the spirit of heaviness. Tell them this is your acceptable year of the Lord, meaning salvation by grace. But also don't forget, there comes a day of judgment. That's the whole gospel. That's Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 4, and explains why that you may become the trees of righteousness, the plantings of the Lord. Wherever you're planted, you can shine, grow, and provide shade and faith and stability wherever you're planted. And so that's the message I got from heaven, was the Isaiah 61. Is that's for everybody. You're not going to lose your salvation, but that's how he works. You stay in the Bible, he'll heal you up. He'll expose your inner nature. He'll chasten you. He'll heal your hurts and keep you repeating the cycle of sin. And he does it supernaturally through the Bible, through reading the Word and studying. No other way. I don't have a formula, don't have a method. It just works. So if any message, that's what I say I got from heaven is that. And I call the ministry verse in Isaiah 61. And that he gave us the Holy Spirit. We have the Holy Spirit. That's what we are to do. And we're going to be opposed by the enemy. The very same entities that saw and held, same type of things. And I see it prevalent in the society in the last days coming upon us. I've never seen it before.
Yeah, amen.
So that was basically my heaven testimony in a nutshell. It was a little bit more, but that's you'll read about it in the book when it comes out.
Well, that is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I hope people are comforted with that, because I know that is a huge issue in Christianity today, is the whole idea about that we might lose our salvation. And, you know, like you said, you're not going to lose, if you're truly in Jesus, if you've given your life to him, like if you trust in him to take you to heaven when you die, you will go to heaven when you die. And the rest of it is the rest of life is a process of sanctification. And like you said, I mean, even scripture says that he's going to chasten or discipline those who he loves. So if you're his child, just like, you know, sometimes when we have children, we have to discipline our children too, to teach them the right way, because we love them. God will do the same with us, because he loves us. So absolutely. Where can people get your book, follow you online, learn more about you, all of your online stuff? Where can people go?
My book is A Land Unknown, Hell's Dominion, and you can get that online at any Christian bookstore will probably have it, or you can order it from Barnes & Noble. You can order it from Amazon.com, order it from Zulon Press as well. It's A Land Unknown, Hell's Dominion, and my writing name is B.W. Melvin, B.W. Melvin. And so also I have you can see me on the Daily Renegade 2.0 as well as the Christian Marauder. You can also see I have my own channel. I do live streams, which are not really posted on the Daily Renegade. And but you can see that, and I do videos, and you go to the Christian Marauder. I don't know the YouTube channel website by heart, but you go to the Christian Marauder and look through there, and you'll find me on there. So you'll see that some of the work I do, some of the videos. I sent you the most recent one that will be showing on Tuesday on the Daily Renegade. So,
yep, and it is. Yeah, it's up on the website right now for members. So if you're a member, you actually get early access. And with Brian stuff.
Werewolves and vampires.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good topic. Yeah, so for Brian's stuff, we put his whole episodes on YouTube for free, but if you get a membership at dailyrenegade.com, you'll get them early. So there is a perk. But and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the same with.
Okay, guys, that one's over.
Bat, ball, Dettol.
Do you sweat at work or play? No More Sweat is the solution, night or day. Body odor or wet clothing?
For you today, if you remember, quite some time back, Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. We have a very special episode for you today. If you remember, quite some time back, I interviewed a gentleman who had a very intense near-death experience where he was actually allowed to see what hell is really like. Now, at the time before this experience, he was an atheist, but after he survived, he became a Christian. And since that interview, I've invited him to be a host for Daily Renegade, and he has been working with us ever since. Brian Melvin hosts the amazingly in-depth yet easy-to-understand Bible study show, The Christian Marauder, and also an interview special called Marauder Intel, where he invites people like Derek Gilbert, L.A. Marzulli, and even sometimes one of our other hosts, Gary Wayne, to discuss the stranger aspects of the Bible not commonly talked about in most churches. Brian has a skill in finding mathematical patterns throughout the scripture, which is what we'll be talking about in the first half of today's program. In the second half, we'll be discussing a darker subject, that of the rampant pedophilia and child sex trafficking epidemic hitting our country and the world. Brian actually has a professional background in working with these highly disturbed individuals, and the insights that he has acquired and will share with us must be kept for the members only section, because YouTube would delete it right away. So this is also one of the rare times where...
Yeah, and that's why I got him on again. That was good, wasn't it?
I will say the second half of this program is probably not going to be appropriate for very young children, but it is definitely needed for parents, so we can all be aware of the dangers out there. If you want access to the whole program and everything we do, including my shows and Brian's shows, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership. So without further ado, we welcome back to the show, Brian Melvin. Brian, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Colorado. Cold though. Hope my furnace doesn't come on because this is a green screen and this is my basement studio.
Well, this is my basement studio as well, and I totally understand problems with heaters just kicking on. I have a manual one here because the automatic, it makes noise and stuff. So totally get that. For those who may have missed the first time that you were on, can you give us a brief background into how you became a Christian and what kind of ministry work that you're involved in today?
Yeah, just real quickly here, make it as brief as I can without going over here too much. I grew up in the south part of near about 2 miles south of Washington, D.C., and my grandparents had a farm. Both of them, one of them, my dad's side had one in Winchester, the other in Southwest Virginia. And so I spent my summers on my grandparents' farm to get out of the insanity here. So I lived in a very crazy time, and my parents were Christians. They took me to church, but that didn't make me a Christian. I fell away from all that, bounced into agnosticism, then bloomed into full-blown atheism. Then I moved to Tucson to get out of the area for some reasons I won't say, but I got out of Dodge, so to speak, and then I went to Tucson, Arizona, where I drank some bad water, and that's where I had my after-death experience, and that is what led me to the Lord, because I know I did not at all deserve to come back, and it changed my life radically. And so I've been following Jesus ever since, and so that's how I got saved. When I came back to on this planet here, I sat in a beanbag chair and said, Lord, take me, I'm yours. That was my salvation prayer, and I'm in it. And I got born again just with that simple prayer. And he took me on a journey, and I ended up in Fort Collins, Colorado, and ended up going to school here, got a degree in social work, so forth, etc. And mostly my ministry started way long time ago because the pastor of a church, took me under his wing. I became the head intercessor, and then we began church planting projects. I was involved in church planting without even knowing what I was doing. I was involved in music, guitar playing. I was in the band. I was in also sound. I ran the soundboard stuff. But we started some church planting opportunities, and then from there, I started, through that church, we studied Greek, Hebrew, so forth, etc. I won't get into all the details, but that's how I started. And then by 1988, I was at a friend's, me and my wife were at a friend's house. We just got married. And so a friend came over, another friend that was visiting says, you know what? I was praying and you would be great in a jail ministry. I said, okay. And so next thing I knew, I took over a jail ministry, a prison ministry for 10 years, from 1988 to 1998. So I worked in there a lot, and I went through school. Plus, I worked in my practicum and stuff was with law enforcement, so forth, etc. So from there, I got hired in the jail. And
隅田国際美術館では当館所蔵の富岳36景、神奈川沖並み
And then from there, I got out of the jail from some, the politics going on, not because of the line staff or the inmates. It was the officers. I won't say it anymore out of respect. There's some good ones, but mostly
because they don't like people helping the crims. That's what the officers are like.
Some, I don't know how they're there, but just to put it mildly. And so I got out of there and went into another organization, a private organization, where I started working with sex offenders. So in the meantime, while doing all that, I was getting involved in First Nations ministry at the same time. So primarily my focus now was from about 2009 to this last year here, current, is going up to the Cheyenne River Reservation. I started going up there in 2011, 2009 and 10 was in the Southwest. And I met a group of people, we church planted, we trained, we supported, and through an organization, we got some Native folks trained and ordained, and we trained them. Our goal was let their hands off, let the Holy Spirit have it, and they're going full blast. It's like waves of revival up there. They survived this lockdown pandemic stuff, and they're doing great.
Oh wow! Well, praise God, that's amazing. I want to ask you about Jubilees. I want to ask you what what exactly are Jubilees and where do they show up in Scripture, but also your your expertise in being able to find these mathematical patterns in Scripture, has that been something that you've always been able to do? Is it kind of a new thing, or is it something that just
Good question.
How did that start, and then go from there to what Jubilees are and how they show up in Scripture?
Well, I like to blame Chuck Missler.
Yes.
Yeah, I was always fascinated when I grew up, it's 1990s, especially when you start showing up on Koinonia House on TV. I was able to watch it, and I was just mesmerized by what he was doing. And so all through the early 90s, actually 1980s, we had videos of him. But when I started watching him on TV, he started talking about, you need to pay attention to Bible names and what they mean. I said, okay. So I started doing what he did everywhere I found a Bible name, and that's pretty much how I started looking at numbers, because he started explaining numbers, that numbers have meaning, and he did the bulletproof method. And so I said, where did he find these definitions? And so just curiosity, Josh, was just curiosity. I look back, I think God was leading me that direction, and I had to really work at it because there was so much minutia out there on Bible numbers and what they mean. And I found out, well, a lot of what's passed off as Bible number meanings come from the Kabbalah.
Yeah.
And then it came from Chaldean numerology, which I studied extensively too. And then I found some websites that had consistent meanings. And then they all said the same thing. We look at the themes, we see where the numbers are in the Bible, what they mean, like the number 12,290, which is Daniel chapter 12.
Right.
And that's a year. And so that's the only time it's used in the Bible. So it's in reference to the Antichrist and the abomination of desolations. That's the root number. The others talk about slaying of martyrs, and those that kill believers will be punished. And so that lines up with that theme. And so I started to go, oh, that's how they did it. They look at the Bible themes. And that's how I started doing this. It was a lot of digging, a lot of research. And then I started saying, well, the ancient numbers were written in pictograph form, and so they have a pictograph meaning. And I figured, well, you apply the pictograph meaning, and all of a sudden it exploded. It's just like wow. I started seeing the patterns and the number meanings. And I was preparing to write a book, but I never will probably publish it because, I have to quote some people, and I asked if I could quote them, and they said, oh, you can use my stuff for free. I go, no, I need a written statement. I need a written statement from you saying I could use this and give you full credit and work something out with it. But he wouldn't do it. So I have to go back and rechange like 3,000 meanings of the first 3,000 numbers and everything.
Yeah,
through all that. It's just.
I totally understand that. I'm an author myself, and I've come across that exact problem more than a few times. And the same thing with documentary films too. Sometimes it can be hard to be able to, know exactly how to quote people. And actually, doing a show like this really helps with that, because once somebody like this person that you're talking about, if you could get him on your show and get him to agree to an interview, whatever he tells you in public, like for the interview, you can just quote him in that because it's already out in the public. So with something like that, you wouldn't need, because his consent would be the interview that he's consenting to. But so that's been kind of one way I've sort of been able to get around it. But I thought that this was really interesting too, because it seems like God has, because lately you've been talking a lot about, numbers and jubilees and stuff in your work. And then at the same time, it's almost like it's a convergence or something. God in my life has been bringing me into a lot of number stuff that I didn't really get in.
It's Black Friday with our biggest dress sale yet. Youth dress is now $8, topless only $6, save $3, and women's dress is now $14. Plus massive summer savings across the store.
Get into until recently, studying the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Essenes and the ancient Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which I should mention, we actually now have a print version of this. I'll talk a little bit more about this after the first half of the program, but Dr. Ken Johnson and I produced a print version of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but basically people can look up what what the feast days are on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar that the Essenes would have been used. It's been pieced together through books like, Jubilees and Enoch and stuff like that. But and I'll say real quick, if people want to check that out, they can get one at the link below. But this topic of Jubilees kept coming up in my research as well, and then that's what led to this interview, because you and I were talking back and forth about it. You had said something in one of your shows that I was helping you out with, editing or something, or uploading it. And I was watching it and I was like, wow, God is bringing him like some of the same conclusions through a different avenue of research. And it was amazing to me because it was just confirmation. So let's talk about Jubilees. So first, what are Jubilees and where do they show up in Scripture?
Well, they come up in Leviticus chapter 25. And let's see. It's hard to explain in 5 easy words or less, but I'll just go for it. Sure. Jubilee it consists of Shemitah years, which are 7-year cycles. And you have 7 times 7, which equals 49. So you have every 6 year, at the end of 6 years, you're required to gather up enough food for the next year. And you're to let the land rest. That's every 7 year. That's a Shemitah. And you're supposed to let the land rest and revive. It's sort of like ancient Mesopotamians, they rotated their crops every 4 years. So it's sort of like that. But this was this every 6 years, you let the land totally rest. You leave it alone. You don't pick anything from it, but you are allowed to buy and sell during that period. And you can, if you're low on food, you could actually buy outside the country and bring it in. I'll talk more about that later. But so that was the Shemitah year. So that after 7 Shemitah years, which was on the 49th year, it began what is known as the year of Jubilee, which is the 50th year. And it gets really confusing, but it's really not that idea. But the Jubilee was the 50th year. And the 49th year was called a sabbatical year, where you give the land a rest. And then the Jubilee year would come, which would be a time of letting everybody who owned debts and slaves free. And I thought that was intriguing. And so according to the biblical regulations, this had a special impact on the ownership and management of the land in ancient Israel. And in the Jubilee year, like I said, they were the prisoners and slaves were set free. The land was returned to its original owner. Everything was like reset in a good sense. Okay. And so, in essence, the purpose of the 49th and 50th year Jubilees was to teach what mercy, grace, and goodness means, and objectively rekindle faith in God into the next generations. That, in other words, he's going to miraculously have bumper crops you wouldn't believe if you abide in this thing. He's going to provide. And so they'll see an objective truth that God actually exists and cares for them. But he was also to teach them mercy, grace, and goodness. And then, they would set people free. They'll see his character traits, because we were actually designed to be image bearers of God, like you well know, and people on this channel should know by now. We're to reflect God's character traits of mercy, goodness, grace, love, righteousness, kindness, fruits of the Spirit, holiness, so forth, etc. But humanity fell, and now in this part of the law, God is trying to reteach humanity how to show mercy, grace, goodness, and rekindle faith in himself. And so here he's showing you need to be merciful. Let the old landowners have their land back. Let the people be free. He's trying to teach them through the law there. However, this was the most violated law in the land. I mean, I'm telling you. The first violations came by traditional misuse of Leviticus chapter 25, verse 14, which talks about buying and selling. And it's I call it the buy-sell clause found in that verse. It was like a loophole, and they totally misused it. And then it morphed into only applying to the nation of Israel itself and not to those living outside of it, which would, according to the law, would apply to those living outside of it. But they said, no, those outside of it, we can make a buck. So we can sell the food back in oppressive prices, which is a violation of Leviticus 25:14, because it says don't oppress in your buying and selling during that year. And so they ignored that. And so they brought this stuff in, and they were profiting off of it. And so so they just ignored this rule, and then there was no mercy, grace shown, and no faith rekindled, and they justified it also. If you research it out, they had treaties with other nations to peace, and so a lot of the treaties involved giving mass amounts of food and as collateral for whatever, and to these nations. And so they said, well, this is a hindrance. We need to produce more crops. So they violated the Shemitah year. They started violating the Jubilee and the 49th year law. And in fact, Jesus illustrates this in Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, when he said, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe and men innocent coming, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. So justice, mercy, and faith was totally thrown out the window by these guys by this time, because by not adhering to the Jubilee of actually justice, returning the land back to its original owner, setting captives free, letting the land rest, and learning that you can trust God. And so Jesus was kind of in a rhetorical way, was addressing that whole thing. And he says that, woe you scribes and Pharisees in verse 25, you are full of extortion and self-indulgence. And that's pretty much what drove the breaking of the Shemitah cycles in the 49th year and breaking the Sabbath rest of the 49th year. So we go to Leviticus chapter 25, verse 8. It says, you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. That'll be to you 49 years. And then you'll blow a trumpet sound on the 10th month of on the 10th month and on the 10th day of the 7th month. I'll get that. And so that's all these two numbers. Like I said, that's probably what intrigued you. So the 10th refers to responsibility of keeping the law, or, just how to live right before God and man. That's the idea of the 10 Commandments. So the 10th day of the 7th month, God wanted perfection and stuff. And then you add those, you get 17. All that has different meanings. And you have a day of atonement, and number 17 means victory, overcoming the enemy. And that's the general root meaning of that. So in order to have victory, overcome the enemy, you remain responsible to God. That's the 10th day of the 7th month. 7th is an important number, meaning God's perfection, but it also means, it's a picture graph of a plow. It means to grow, plant, and war until you achieve at a state of basically God's original design, where you're whole and sound. That's the idea of it. You're whole and sound, and everything's healed up on the inside. The land's healed. Your relationships with one another are healed, and that's the idea of the Jubilee year. So even in those numbers, it helps explain what the Day of Atonement for that particular Day of Atonement would mean for them, and make atonement that they violated the law, they violated mercy and grace. It's time to get right here. Let's do this. Let's get back and rekindle our relationship with God. And then in, I think Leviticus 5, verse 6, it says, the Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you, your male and female servants, your hired man, and your stranger who dwells with you, for your livestock and beasts, or in the land shall be produce for food. And the verse 5 talks about don't harvest anything. And this is what confuses people. But David Guzik points out in that verse, and I quote him here, this Bible study commentary, anything of this nature that the land produces without human aid is of the property of all. And the people were to attain food wherever they could find it, just as Israel did in the wilderness wanderings. And so the idea is that you couldn't use the land and harvest it for profit. You just let it grow. Then anybody can go out there who needed the food and just go get it.
That's interesting.
And sort of a sense of justice and mercy being displayed there. And so during that, on the 10th day of the 7th month, which would be our July, they were allowed till a 2-month period to collect food like that for the 50th year Jubilee. I thought that was interesting. And so the
If you're anything like me, you love a work lunch.
So the 50th year Jubilee was called the year of release, where the land, property, and property rights were returned to the original owner, slaves set free. And but all of a sudden, this was thrown out the window with these guys, and it was rarely, if ever, applied in Second Temple period, but it was used in order to sanctify the 49th year. Instead, the 50th year was kind of ignored, and they never really did anything. And they just did it all to make profit. And after the temple's destruction, people began a new practice to number each seventh year as a sabbatical year without necessarily adding the 50 year. They just threw that 50th year Jubilee out. Wow. So they basically maintained the law, but learning how to reflect God's mercy, grace, kindness, and goodness and rekindle their faith with God was simply not there.
You know, it's amazing. It's amazing. I just want to jump in real quick, but you actually just gave me a piece to a puzzle that I've been trying to put together on how the Pharisees handled the Jubilee years and stuff, and then how the Essenes handled it. Because there's this debate: is a Jubilee 49 or is it 50 years? And like you just said, it depends on which group you're talking about. The Pharisees ignored the 50th year altogether. So for them, in their stuff, it's like 49. But the Essenes, they broke off from the Sadducees and Pharisees because they wanted to do it God's way. You know, they actually wanted to follow the correct way of doing it. And when you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, like the Book of Jubilees, for example, and I actually just did a video on this, and I wrote about it in a book that is going to be coming out soon. But and Dr. Ken Johnson has shown this too. From the Essenes' perspective, they did their Jubilees with the 50th year to honor God. So I just wanted to jump in with that real quick. It's amazing that you bring that up. So we actually have two different systems here. The one that's kind of against God, which, you know, would be the Pharisees and Sadducees, and then the Essenes that are trying to follow God with the appropriate 50-year Jubilee. It's amazing that you brought that up.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's that animosity and that strife there, but the whole idea was the remarkable rekindling of faith. In other words, to keep faith alive to successive generations at the 50th year was 2 years. God was going to produce food in the land. I just read that verse 5 of Leviticus, and it would be enough to maintain them. And that would be a sign that God's real and a bumper crop. And people, Jewish communities outside of Israel who practiced this, I think one in 1952, they practiced this. And so for 2 years, they kept the older seeds and didn't know if they would grow, but they grew better than the other places who didn't practice this. They skipped it. Their seeds were ruined by some type of fungus.
Wow.
And then these people had a bumper crop and was able to provide the food for the others. And because they abided by the principle there, and they abide by letting debts go free, landowners have it all back, they actually applied it. And so there's a lot of different, I call it test programs, where they actually did this, and that happened. I'm talking about the Jewish people alone in different parts of the world. And even in Israel, they practice this, they get a bumper crop. And it's just amazing. And it's like, God made it so simple. He's trying to rekindle their faith and build faith in himself.
Yeah.
And not to be justified so much by the law, but the law was to teach us how to be responsible to each other, show mercy, kindness, goodness, truth, the fruit of the Spirit. But sin nature reaches in there. There's also one other thing I think you'd like to touch on about the Jubilee. It's also, I learned this because when I was doing the church planting thing, the first church plant we did was with a Messianic congregation. And so I was in the praise band and soundboard at that time. And so we were there getting it started. So I learned a lot about the feast and the festivals and all that. And so we went through a long thing with rabbis and different teachers and stuff. They would show you how the prophetic implications of the Feast of Trumpets, so forth, etc. But the Jubilees was always fascinating. And they never really said it, but I kept thinking, there's going to be a last Jubilee where the landowners are going to get their land back, and that's us. And that comes in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, because it's amazing how, the Jubilees, Jewish feast days and all of this, how they're fulfilled in Jesus Christ, but even prophetically. And in your show, The Christian Marauder, which again, if people want to watch, they can go to dailyrenegade.com, and you have all the episodes there. But you have an entire series on the whole book of Revelation. It's an absolutely phenomenal series. And you just now are getting to the last chapters in it. What is the final fulfillment of what we've been talking about found in Revelation 21 and 22? How does all this culminate prophetically in Jesus Christ?
Well, five easy words or less.
Take as much time as you need.
Okay. No, well, it culminates, it's a lot there. It culminates with the second coming of Christ.
Okay, not many are watching this, so I must be a bit bored. I'll do this one.
Well, that's probably what the whole book is. Half of it is the title. It's great to have you back. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special returning guest, Dr. Michael Heiser, to talk with us about the parables of Enoch from his latest commentary, A Companion to the Book of Enoch, a Reader's Commentary, Volume 2, The Parables of Enoch, which covers 1 Enoch 37 through 71. So a very short, succinct title, easy to remember. Mike, it's great.
I tried to make it longer, but,
Yeah. Well, that's probably what the whole book is. Half of it is the title. It's great to have you back on the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks. It's like those 17th century books where the title's like 40 words long. Like they confuse title with preface.
Right. That's how the preface was invented. So, for those who may not have read your first commentary, this is the second volume. I actually have them here. People want to take a look. Excellent books. This is the second one, the one we'll be talking about today. That's the first one. For those who may not have read the first commentary, the one that we're going to be talking about is the second volume in a series. Can you give us a little background on the Book of Enoch? What time period did this come from? Who read it, and how was it understood in its own time?
Yeah, as far as the textual material we have, that goes back, let's just use round numbers, 300 BC. And the earliest stuff would be from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Aramaic fragments. So that's where the date comes from. The book's probably a little older than that. Somewhere in Second Temple period, which is the intertestamental period. So again, round numbers, 500 BC to 70 AD is the period. And the content, fits with a lot of other things in that period, but it has some unique features that are shared by other books that.
Danielle had a crazy idea to sell her beans all across Australia, so she hopped on Crazy Domains and secured her web address.
That because Enoch is the most noteworthy one, scholars tend to refer to these other ones as Enochian. How original is that? So that's the time period. As far as the content, Enoch is an apocalypse, which is a nice academic way of saying the book is essentially saying you're all doomed. Whoever's reading this is doomed. It's the Revelation, like Book of Revelation, it's the end of the world, all this apocalyptic, imagery and themes and whatnot. And so that's Enoch, but the book itself is actually, it's kind of like the Bible in that how the Bible is an assemblage of separate books. And Enoch is like that too. There's at least 5, some would say, 7 or 8 separate, books or authorial hands in here. I mean, nobody really knows for sure, but there are enough differences between sections that's a working theory. And the first 36 chapters, which was the first commentary, is known as the Book of the Watchers because it really fixates on, okay, this is an apocalypse, that Enoch is telling you about. You're all doomed, but here's why. So it's basically the whole world is just, utterly depraved, and it traces the depravity of human.
Hi, Dynamic Dragoness. Yeah, not really a Bible study, but because this is the Book of Enoch, but I basically do Christian content and usually end day stuff. So welcome to the channel.
All right, not to Genesis 3. It takes it back to Genesis 6, okay, with what the Watchers taught humankind. And again, the way I like to put it is to more efficiently
Yeah, that's a better answer, Han.
destroy themselves and those around them. So idolatry, astrology, arts of seduction, immorality, warfare, wanton, death and destruction. So all of that in the mind of not just whoever wrote Enoch, but lots of Second Temple authors can be traced back to the pre-flood events with the Watchers, the sons of God in biblical, parlance.
So can you give us an overview of the parables of Enoch, which is found in chapters 37 through 71? This is the focus of your latest commentary overall. What are these parables about? What's their purpose?
Yeah, so this is the second section, of the overall book of Enoch. And it is different than the first because you do have these parables, like there's no parables in the first section. And the parables sort of explain again, what's coming and why. And so it'll dip into, the Watcher's story here and there. But the major focus is actually not the cause or, anything like that. It's really on the final judgment. And this is the section of the book that focuses on the Messiah. Because in Enoch, and especially in these chapters, the Messiah he doesn't come as like we think of in the New Testament as a conquering king and a savior figure, atoning death. There's nothing like that. This is all pre-Jesus. Rather, the Messiah is presented as the judge. Okay, he's going to be the judge of the wicked. He's going to vindicate the righteous, and then we're going to have the kingdom, of God.
And that's more the second Christ coming than the first.
That sort of thing. So for people more familiar with the Bible, if you think Day of the Lord, again, this kind of the thing where, the Lord returns, again, the wicked are punished, the righteous are validated, and that's the end of all things, and so on and so forth. So there's it's kind of like Ragnarok, lots of death and destruction and judgment. But on the other side of that, again, you have the righteous being with the Lord. Well, that's what this section of Enoch is about. And the parables get into who the Messiah is, and basically a profile, and also who are the wicked and why are they being judged, and then therefore who are the righteous and why are they again going to be with the Lord at the end. So the parables sort of explain the division. It explains the judgment. It explains again what's going to happen, and but the major focus, the reason why these get a lot of attention is you have in this section of the book, you have a pre-Christian Jewish profile of Messiah that includes things that lots of critics of Christianity like to say were invented by the early church. And that is not the case. This is datable. There's a reference to the Parthians, for instance, in the book, which allows, the majority of scholars are agreed that this section of Enoch is probably about 40 BC, trickling on into the first century. But that's still a good half century before the earliest gospel, was written. So this is pre-Christian stuff, and you have things like a pre-existent Messiah. Enoch uses all of the familiar terminology: the chosen one, the righteous one, the Son of Man, the anointed one, Mashiach. And so it tells you, again, at least there was one strain of Judaism that sounds awfully close to the kinds of things that we get in the New Testament. The only thing missing is an atoning death, and resurrection. So it's like, think second coming, think day of the Lord, and that's your Messiah, when it comes to, the book of the parables.
Yeah, it's always interesting to read stuff from the Dead Sea Scrolls because there's like this connective tissue between the Old and the New Testament, and it's really interesting to see how possibly some of this stuff might have had some influence. Usually when we as Christians think of parables, we think of the many parables of Jesus. Now, how do the parables of Enoch compare to what we're used to in the Bible? Are these similar, or are these just totally different?
Well, in terms of what literarily what a parable is, they're similar. They're going to be, they're going to be stories. Okay, there's going to be a story flavor to them that is going to convey, certain truths.
The BCFing Black Friday sale is here. We've got deals for days.
Which again is very typical for what we think of as parables. So since we have storytelling mode, okay, in this section 3 times, 3 extended parables, that's why it gets its name. So it's a fair equivalence to draw.
Would Jesus have been familiar with the Book of Enoch? Because immediately in chapter 38, a line jumped out at me. It might be a general line that was, used. I mean, we use it today, but it's talking about the sinners who are judged. It says it had been good for them if they had not been born. Yet that sounds really similar to something Jesus said about Judas. Is the idea that Jesus may have been familiar with Enoch, is that a reach, or are there some similar phraseology from the Book of Enoch found in the New Testament, in the Gospels, or even in other areas of the New Testament that might tell us possibly even Jesus himself may have been familiar with this text?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if we begin with the assumption, and I think it's a sound one, that what Matthew and other gospel writers, for instance, are writing when they have dialogue between Jesus and either his disciples or his enemies, that's a genuine representation of stuff Jesus said. I mean, nobody's going around with a tape recorder, obviously, and the synoptic gospels are different, but it's a faithful presentation. With that assumption, I think it's certain that he knew the content. To me, here's the line that stands out is Matthew 25:41, where he's talking about judgment, just like Enoch is, and then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Okay, that combination. That characterization and combination of the devil and angels with this lake of fire thing. This is the only place where the combination occurs. You get two of the three, later on in the book of Revelation, but you get all of those things in the book of Enoch. In other words, Enoch is sort of the pool from which that specific language comes. And so, again, if this is Jesus actually talking, yeah, I mean, this, it reflects very, very clearly, what's going on here. It's not the only example. On my podcast, Naked Bible Podcast, we actually did an episode. It's got to be 3 years ago now, on heavenly books. Okay, and the one we're familiar with is the Book of Life and all this. And then we did another one on this kind of language. And these are some of the clearest examples of where New Testament writers and characters, including Jesus, are actually referencing things in the book. Okay, maybe they don't quote chapter verse. I mean, Jude does. Everybody knows that the New Testament, at least in Jude, will dip into it explicitly. But what they don't seem to realize is that the content of the book is referenced a lot. It's alluded to a lot. And again, for my money, this is one of the most transparent examples of this, because you don't have this come from the Old Testament. You don't have this, spelled out. Now you have all the data points. Okay, there's the Satan figure in his realm. He's the realm of the dead, the underworld. And you've got demons and rebellious supernatural beings that are in this place. I mean, all the data points are there, but you never get it spelled out anywhere. Where they're all these things are collected and put in one place. But in Enoch you do, and in Matthew 25 you do.
So back in that time, in the time of Jesus, how did they view the Book of Enoch? Did they view this as scripture? Was it a part of their canon, or was it just a history book to them? How would they have viewed this, and how does that inform how we should view it today?
Yeah, it's fair to say that the overwhelming majority of the Jewish community did not consider the Book of Enoch canonical. The exception to that are the people who lived at Qumran, and the best bet for them is still the Essenes, even though there are niggly problems with it. But that's still the best bet. They cite, there's a couple of lines of evidence for how they felt about the book. They cite it with formulaic language, thus it is written, or as it is written, or here's the interpretation. They use certain phrases when they are quoting books that we in today's world would recognize as canonical, whether we're Protestant or Catholic. And they do that for those books and for Enoch. They also do it for the Temple Scroll, which is a kind of a sectarian document. The other thing they do is they produce commentaries, just like we have today, commentaries on biblical books. And that the people at Qumran, the scribes, they only wrote commentaries on biblical books and Enoch, and the Temple Scroll. So it tells you that those two things were elevated in their eyes. So you at least have one stream, one stripe or variety of what we call Second Temple Judaism consider this, a canonical work. And before we move on from that point, I think the audience needs to realize that Second Temple period or intertestamental Judaism is a lot like saying the word Christianity today. There is no one of those.
Right.
There's not as much variety as if you use the word Christian today, because you've got your three main branches, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, and then underneath all of those we get to splinter them. So you've got dozens and dozens of things that are Christian. Wasn't quite that situation, but you got a good 4 or 5, going on in the intertestamental period. So there is no one Judaism. So we have to realize that, but there was at least one of those, one strand that considered Enoch, as part of their sacred texts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm curious too about the original writer's view of ancient history and eschatology, what that was and how it compares or contrasts with our own. So for example, in chapter 39, it says, in those days, the elect and holy children will descend from the high heaven, and their seed will become one with the children of men. Now, is that an event that would have been future from Enoch's time, meaning that it points towards Genesis 6, or is this something from the future, what would be the future of the writer in the 2nd century or 1st or whenever it was written? And in either case, how do we make sense of who the elect and holy children are?
Yeah, well, since they are elect and holy, this would be something, future. It wouldn't be Genesis 6, because that's about as far as you could get from elect and holy.
Right.
So, and really what it refers to is and I'm going to use biblical lingo now. It refers to the restoration of Eden, because Eden, again, I wrote a lot about this in Unseen Realm, that the whole Edenic plan was, God's, supernatural family, as it were, the heavenly host, coming to earth with him, in this place, called Eden, that God creates humans. And the whole idea is that God is going to come to man, dwell with him, and they're going to be there too. So we have this blended family kind of thing, supernatural and human, all in the same place, all together. And the idea would have been that if there had been no fall or no rebellion, this is the way life was supposed to be. Humans were supposed to be fit for sacred space out of the gate. And I think we can conclude, because of where the story ends, that eventually we would have been either glorified to be more like them or something like that. But this was the intention, to have this blended family thing. So the line in Enoch really is a lot like what you get in the New Testament, in New Eden, new creation, the global Eden thing, the way the book of Revelation ends, where you have again, you have this re-merging, you have humans joining the celestial family, and so on and so forth. In Unseen Realm, the way I put this is that human believers replace what was lost in all these rebellions. We become the reconstituted council. You got Hebrews 2, you got Hebrews 12. Everybody stops at the first verse for Hebrews 12. The cloud of witnesses. When we keep reading, it's this gathering of festal, angels. There's a lot more to it, than that. But Eden is brought back full circle, and this was the original plan. And so that's why, our sanctification ends with this being part of the picture, that we become, regrafted into this. And this is the Enochian way, of expressing the same idea at the time of the end. So again, just that little bit, there's a point of consistency that's very clear, between this book and material in the New Testament. So again, it just goes to defy this notion, because people tend to dismiss Enoch and other, Second Temple literature. Well, where is it quoted? I want to see a quote. Well, okay. If I was a mean, nasty person, I would want to see where the New Testament quotes explicitly the Old Testament. About half of the quotations we think we have are not explicit, but they're allusions and they're clear. So it's the same kind of thing going on. You don't have to give the chapter and verse reference for people who know the material to know what you're thinking when you're using that line or that phrase or that, that imagery. They know where they're tracking, because they're familiar, with the whole scope of it. So I think it's important, generally, but we could, if we want to get into some apologetic value, I think especially this section is really useful in a very specific apologetics way when it comes to Messiah. But I'm going to let you drive. I'll stay in my lane.
Oh yeah, I definitely do have a question about that. Just to put a cap on this one. So when it says, their seed will become one with the children of men, that's not what we're thinking of, like some kind of mating, between, humanity and us and our resurrected bodies, because
right.
Jesus said there's no marriage.
Right. The term seed doesn't refer to copulation. It refers to the result of copulation. In other words, these guys are going to, this family is going to be mixed with that family. They're both seed. They're both the result of, creation.
Definitely. Yeah, that makes sense. In chapter 40, you had mentioned angels, and in chapter 40, we actually get a glimpse of the importance of angels in really all throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we find it a lot in Enoch. It talks about these 4 presences. And as we discover, the names for these angels are Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Phanuel, if I'm saying that right. Would these be the same as the 4 cherubim from Ezekiel? Would the writer be drawing from that, or the living creatures in Revelation? And why were angels so important to those in the first century who followed the Dead Sea Scroll writings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't really see any correlation with the cherubim of Ezekiel. I mean, to be honest with you, an archangel would be of much higher rank than a throne guardian, that sort of thing. So, plus, if you actually read the passage, there's very little to suggest that. It would. It's a nice way of saying there's nothing to suggest that. I mean, you'd at least want some, sort of connection other than, there's 4 of those. Except where there's not, I mean, there are other places in Enoch where the number is different. You actually get 7, and this goes back to the sections and authorship and authorial hands, and because the number is not always consistent. Sometimes it's 7, but the big 4 here are clearly listed, but I don't see a connection back. I think this is they have ruling authority, and the cherubim would not.
Exactly, and that kind of ties in with your previous book, Angels, and how this denotes or their jobs or their what they're supposed to do rather than like their species or whatever.
It's really interesting though, because some of them in Enoch get very specific, jobs. It's not just hierarchical language, because some of the archangels are selected out to do specific things. So on the podcast, we're doing a series on the use of the Old Testament in the book of Revelation. Okay, so we're at Revelation. I think we just recorded or are going to record chapter 9.
Oh, nice.
And it's interesting. There's this whole debate over. Okay, you get to Revelation 9:1. You get the angel with the key. He has the key to the bottomless pit, and so on and so forth. So is that the same one as over in Revelation 20 verse 1? But the real question is this a good guy or a bad guy?
Right.
The most obvious candidate though is Uriel from the book of Enoch, because he is actually described as being the angel over Tartarus. Okay, which is the pit. Again, that's Peter's terminology. For the angels that sinned. The watchers in Enoch and Enochian language. So he's the most obvious candidate. So we'll get into that when we record that session. But it's a good example of how you go from this general job description to, this is all sort of
what it takes to make Peking duck pancakes.
Just 10 minutes with love.
Your job description. So hope you're good at this.
It'd be weird if he wasn't good at it. It's like, well, you know me better than anybody. Why would you have me do this when you created me to not be good at this? You had mentioned a good apologetic tool in the second parable, which is chapters 45 through 57. We see focus shift to this Messiah figure that you mentioned, who's the one that judges sinners. And the interesting thing is, like you alluded to, is that we're always taught in church that no Jew ever at any time ever really understood who the Messiah would be or what he would be doing or anything about him, and it was a total mystery until Jesus came. But the book of Enoch seems to tell a much different story, as do much of the Dead Sea Scrolls. What was the expectation of the Messiah within different Jewish factions just before the time of Christ?
Great question.
And why did the Dead Sea Scrolls seem to paint a picture of the Messiah that seems really similar to Jesus?
Yeah, again, because there were multiple sects of Judaism, not everybody's expectations, were identical. So, that's the first thing out of the gate, because they're all looking at the same source. They're looking at the Hebrew Bible, and they're looking at a mass of data points. And so the question is, okay, we've got all this scattered information about this deliverer guy, the servant, Mashiach, all these different terms. So how do we put this together and create a profile? And we know, having read the New Testament, that the New Testament writers will use Old Testament passages in ways that are quite unexpected to us. And what people don't realize is that some of those ways would have been quite unexpected to certain, sects of Judaism at the time. But there were other sects of Judaism that really tracked on it. Now that it's a little bit of a convoluted way of saying this. You're right that, and it's typically Christmas or Easter. We get treated to the History Channel special, or the MSLSD or something. The Christ of faith versus the Jesus of history. These specials basically that are so woefully underinformed. But they're designed to create this hermeneutic of suspicion that the Jesus of the Gospels, really, that isn't what was described in the Old Testament. So this stuff that Christians believe must be made up later. That's where it's going with this. The magazines on the impulse shelf, the whole bit. There's this Jesus of history, and then there's the Christ that the church made up. But Enoch and other books, but especially Enoch and especially this section, really defies that. You can't coherently say things like the interpretive spin that the New Testament writers have on this or that passage is totally unique and made up, because it's not. You can find all of their trajectories somewhere in Second Temple Judaism. Okay, we might have one strand that tracked on one or two, and then another strand doesn't track on those two, but they track on another one here. So the New Testament writers are actually, they're going to align with different Jewish outlooks, the 4 or 5 different outlooks. And the one where you get the most hits, as it were, is the Enochian trajectory, the Enochian strand here. And some of the most important stuff, like pre-existence. This is an idea that clearly, if you think the Messiah was around before there was a world, well, then the chances are pretty high that you're looking at a divine being here. How else can you parse that? And that's one of those things that, this is something that the church invented later. Like First Enoch 48. I was on an interview yesterday, and I said, look, all the Watcher Genesis 6 stuff, that gets all the press, okay? But if there's one passage in Enoch that is of value for Christians, it's this one, and it's First Enoch 48. So it's the Son of Man, which ought to be real familiar, okay? So in that place, Enoch says, I saw the fountain of righteousness, which was inexhaustible, and around it were many fountains of wisdom. So he's having this vision of the dwelling of God. And all the thirsty drank of them and were filled with wisdom, and their dwellings were with the righteous and holy and elect. And at that hour, that Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of Spirits, God, and his name before the head of days. Again, that's very similar to Ancient of Days. Verse 3, yea, before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of heaven were made, his name was named before the Lord of Spirits. So essentially the Son of Man gets is tasked, okay, before before humans were created. I mean, really at the dawn of creation. So there you go. I mean, Son of Man is the title used most of the time in Enoch for the Messiah figure. And it's also, Jesus' favorite title for himself. So think of it this way. If I'm somebody living out in the desert, with this Qumran group, and it's like, we're out here, we're expecting, they were expecting the Messiah. You talked about eschatology before. Everybody had their own eschatological system. And the one at Qumran, the Essenes, is the only one that sort of fits the window into which Jesus was born, which is really interesting because they believed in 100 cycles of Jubilees, 4,900 years, and they did their math, based on that. It was a 364-day calendar, and it has this window, from like 10 BC to 6 AD or something like that, where the Messiah was supposed to happen. So if you're out there in the desert, you're thinking this, and all of a sudden you hear about this guy Jesus, and you hear about the miracles, and you hear like when he was born, and you just hear stuff that people are saying about him. You're probably thinking, maybe we were right. When's my day off? I gotta go. I gotta go hear this guy. When's can I have a hall pass out of the desert because I need to go check this guy out. And there are a number of things about the Qumran lifestyle and their theology, and again their reverence for Enoch and the content of Enoch that leads a number of scholars to wonder that it seems reasonable to think that a lot of the people who would have been of this community would have followed, would have become Jesus followers because of all these different things. Because he's out there, oh yeah, you gotta go hear this guy. You know what his favorite title for himself is? Son of Man. Isn't that funny? Again, if you're the guy from Qumran, you're probably sitting there thinking, that's not really funny.
It's Christmas at Motor 10. Time to drop some subtle hints like hint on this Weather Q3100, just $839. Or surprise me with this storage Geelong cabinet, just $189. Get the gifts you really want at the other hardware store, Motor 10.
Funny. That in fact, it's a little scary, because like if this is the guy, again, we're all doomed here, whose side are we on? Because you're expecting that this messianic arrival, and again, you're thinking Day of the Lord. That's what you're thinking, which isn't terribly comforting. They're thinking Day of the Lord, which again isn't a warm and fuzzy thought because of all the it's the apocalypse, it's judgment and whatnot. So I find it really hard to believe that. If you're somebody who had this theology, again, that's reflected in Enoch, and this is the community that revered Enoch and took care of a lot of these texts, that when you hear this stuff, you just conclude that can't be him, can't be the guy. I would think the exact opposite is true. That it's like, holy cow, we maybe we're right, because again of their whole eschatological system and just the messianic stuff in the book. I mean, they're going to know this. They're going to know this material, and it's going to at the very least draw attention. So the idea that this is all post-Christian invention, this sort of the supernatural elements or the divine elements with the Messiah. People who claim that have never read 1 Enoch 48 and other passages in the book. And frankly, other things in other books. It's like you might as well just put a disclaimer on your show that says, right, we're hopelessly uninformed and ignorant. Please watch our show, because the claims just don't match the data. But again, they're not interested in data. They're interested in driving this wedge, between, like I said, the quote unquote Jesus of history and the Christ of faith, because that just serves a greater agenda.
Yeah, I agree. And anytime I see anything from those channels, it really makes that obvious. I want to ask you if there's any way we can know if Jesus had direct interactions with the Qumran community in any way. We do have a lot more to talk about too. We got to talk about wisdom, and you mentioned these books. I want to get a little bit more into that and the angels, much more. But before we do, Mike, if people want to get your book and find you online, where can they do that?
and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And God said, let there be light.
No, I'll show that later.
Hey, Sarah, how do I clean a pool?
People recommend using a mop.
What?
And my dog is way out ahead of me.
There is a supernatural world that surrounds us, and sometimes it manifests to people like you and me. You hear stories like this and so much more right here on Supernatural Confrontations. The title of our story today, our interview today, is entitled Shapeshifter. I think you'll find it incredibly interesting. But first, a word from our trusted sponsor. Did you know that the aging process starts as early as the age of 25? After that, you start to lose about 1% of your collagen supply every year. Folks, try this at-home test. I have, to see if you've got enough collagen. Pinch your skin. If it immediately bounces back, then you have enough collagen in your skin. If it doesn't bounce back or fold back immediately, then you might need a collagen supplement. Multi-collagen helps rejuvenate your body from the inside out with 5 supercharged types of collagen your body needs for optimal health. Give it a try. Your health is your wealth after all. Taste, inspect, and judge risk-free for yourself. If it doesn't live up to your expectations, this is an incredible deal, ladies and gentlemen. You have a full 60 days to get a complete refund, no questions asked. Plus, you'll get 51% off, along with several free bonuses included at no extra cost. Go to the link below, healthwithla.com, healthwithla.com. Folks, I take it every day. So Dina joins us. She lives in New Mexico, and she had an encounter with this black dog. And I've heard stories similar to this, not quite exactly like this before, but let's roll the interview. You'll hear it and decide for yourself. I will weigh in on it at the very end because I have some things to talk about and discuss and say about what a shapeshifter is and why I think she encountered one. But here's the interview. Once again, folks, Supernatural Confrontations, we're here with Dita. And I just want to thank everyone who comes on the record because it takes a certain amount of boldness and courage on their part because, you know, a lot of times we hear this all the time. I can't go to my pastor with this. He'll think I'm crazy, or I can't tell my friends or whatever. But we know that stuff happens. Good stuff, bad stuff. We live in a supernatural world and it surrounds us. I say that every single show. So without me blabbing away here and taking up your time, what happened to you? Tell us about that, please.
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. Very hard to talk about because people look at you like you're crazy when you tell them something like this. But about 10 years ago, I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We have the Petroglyph Monument that I live right next to. And for those that don't know that, it's about 17 miles long. It's a lava escarpment on the west side of Albuquerque, loaded with petroglyphs and arrowheads and all kinds of things like that. And it's someplace we walk all the time. It's very close to our house. We took our dog out. This time it was just me alone with the dog. I had him off the leash and he's having fun chasing rabbits. And all of a sudden I look up and standing on some lava rocks is a black dog. And I tried to get my dog to come to me. He's very aggressive with other dogs. And I thought, I'm going to have a dog fight on my hands. He sees the dog and takes off after him. It was about 100 yards away. So I'm running after him in a panic. And I'm watching him. He climbs right up on these rocks to this black dog, and they're sniffing each other. And I'm still running, and I'm keeping my eye on them. And all of a sudden, the dog was gone. The black dog just disappeared. And I never seen anything like that. And there's no place it could have gone. I mean, I would have seen it had it jumped to other rocks or ducked under into like a little hole under a rock or something. Didn't see anything. What got me was my dog was just
good cat, mum, hen.
He was just standing on the rock looking around. He couldn't pick up a scent, and normally he would have picked up the scent and gone after it wherever it went. It's the area that this happened. It's straight up on the left side, and it's about 20 feet down on the right side. So I would have either seen him go up or jump down. It would have been quite a jump. Didn't see it. Got up there, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of fear. I'm retired law enforcement. I've never felt that kind of fear. Something was just really, really wrong. So I got my dog on a leash, and we took off back home. And it's something to this day I can't make sense of. There was a dog there. It was very real, and I guess I could explain it away had my dog not been with me, as seeing a shadow or something.
But the dog
But the fact
chased
that
it.
he went after it,
Yeah.
he was sniffing it. They were having some type of contact, and then it just vanished. So it was about 2 or 3 days after that. I didn't want to go back over there. I was kind of
Oh, there's more. Yeehaw.
freaked out. And I started looking around. I thought, does it have a den? Is there something I missed? And I start just combing the area. Go down into the ravine, which again is about 25 feet below where this happened. It's a drop. And I go down, and I'm just looking, and I come across this large lava rock covered in petroglyphs. Never seen it before. Never seen one in the escarpment. I'm sure I haven't covered the whole escarpment since I've lived here, but there's nothing like it around. And it's just sitting down in this ravine right below where this dog disappeared. So that was my curiosity is, what did I see? I've been trying to figure this out. Is there something supernatural? Obviously there is going on. And I included the picture of the rock with the email I had sent you to see what you thought about it.
Let me ask you some questions. How far away were you as you're running? Now, when you run in a place like that, unless it's a nice, were you running on some sort of like a road, a smooth road? Or was it?
It's not smooth. It's like a utility road to reach some of the power lines up in there. So it's rocky, sandy, a lot of sand. And it was about 100 yards ahead of me when I initially saw it. And of course, I'm closing the gap, running. My dog is way out ahead of me. And I was probably about 25 yards away when it just disappeared.
So that's really close. So let me just, for our listeners, you're a trained observer. If you're in law enforcement, you are a trained observer.
Yes.
So, you've got a leg up on the general populace because you went through that type of training and learned how, when you're observing something, to look at things objectively. And so I'm assuming your eye was on this thing. But let me ask you this. As you're running, I know when I run, if I'm looking straight ahead, let's say on the beach, if I'm looking straight ahead, I don't need to really look at my feet. But if I'm on a road like what you're talking about, I might be doing this. Were you running and looking at your feet and then picking your head up?
Not that I remember, because I was more concerned about keeping an eye on the dogs to see if I'm gonna any aggression.
Was your eye trained on the dog at all times?
Yes.
Okay, so I believe that. As a trained
Yeah.
observer, you're not going to, okay, I believe that. So you're looking at the dog, you're 25 yards away. That's close enough to see if the dog was wearing a collar. Was the black dog wearing a collar?
Nothing.
Okay, so let's say, so I'm looking for a prop, and of course there is none, but let's say this is a rock. So on this side, it's like 25 yards down.
Yeah,
So
about
it's
25 feet.
Okay, 25 feet.
Yes.
That's a long, that's a big
It
jump.
is.
Dogs aren't going to jump off a 25-foot ledge. And on this side, what do we have on that side?
It goes straight up to the top of the mesa.
Like this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that. So you've got
Right.
the little ledge here. So your dog, how did your dog gain access to this dog?
Well, the road runs right up to that area, and it's an access point for power lines. So he ran up to the end of that road, and then the big lava boulders start to build as it goes up the mesa. And the black dog was standing on one of those lava rocks right at the end, and my dog just jumped up on the rock with it, and they're sniffing each other, and then it was gone.
Was the black dog bigger than, what kind of dog do you have, first of all?
My dog was a Labrador Rhodesian Ridgeback mix. He was a very large dog.
Yeah.
And this dog, the black dog, was a comparable size. I would say German Shepherd size.
Bigger or smaller?
About the same size as my dog.
What time of day was it?
It was probably about 3:30 in the afternoon.
What season? What
It was probably towards the end of summer where it wasn't super hot, but it wasn't.
The days are long still.
The days are long, yeah.
So you're there 3:30 in the afternoon. So it's not getting on dusk. You see this black dog. He's on the rock. And as you're running, did you actually see him just vanish in
It
front
was
of you?
just gone. Yeah, just gone.
So okay, like you're looking like this. Let's say one dog, two dogs. You're looking at the dogs. They're sniffing each other. All of a sudden,
Just gone.
just like that.
So I'm looking at my dog, and he's just standing on the rock, bewildered, just looking around, kind of confused about where did this thing just go. And normally he would be on the hunt. I mean, he would be on the scent. That was his nature. And he wasn't even, he was just looking confused, like, where did you go?
So when you went up to get your dog, what was his reaction? What did he do?
He certainly let me put on the leash. His hair was all bristled. He kept looking around. I kept pulling him, trying to get him to come with me. He certainly was hesitating on coming with me. And I was just, something came over me. Absolute fear. I don't even know how to explain it other than that we need to leave this area right now.
Was the black dog?
So I kind of drug him down. Drug him down, and then we just left as fast as we could.
So was the black dog wolf-like in any way or no?
It certainly looked a shepherd. We have coyotes. It definitely was not a coyote, because we encountered those every now and then.
Sure.
It certainly had upright ears, all black, medium fur, that I could tell from when I was looking at it. Again, kind of looked shepherd-like, but no markings, no collar, nothing like that.
This is what I think you may have encountered, specifically because the area that you're in, with all the petroglyphs, and then you find the petroglyph. It'd be really interesting to get a picture of the petroglyphs below the rock, the one that you saw that you'd never seen before in the creek bed. That'd be really interesting.
That would be interesting.
I would posit that, and let me just stop by telling everybody a quick story here. That when I was on the Dene tribe's reservation, and I was with Pastor Curtis, And he told me a story when he actually took me to the place where he was about 15 or 16 years old. It's a very hilly area. Like the hills just kind of roll in the desert like that. So the kids are playing, they're climbing up one hill. They hear this horrible scream. They get to the top, and coming up the hill is a wolf man. It's the only way you can do that. A dog man. You know, the legs of a wolf, the body of a man, head of a wolf like this. But I also know, I don't know, but I have heard and studied in my research that shamans they'll adapt a certain spirit will attach to them, and they will literally transmogrify, change into that totem animal. And what you could have seen was a shaman and his totem or what he was able to transfer him into or transform into would be the black dog.
Like a shapeshifter.
A shapeshifter, exactly what it is. I mean, I'm sure you've thought about a shapeshifter.
Oh, yes.
That's what I think you encountered, specifically because of the fear thing. I mean, it's just another dog. Why all of a sudden are you afraid? You know?
Yeah.
Describe the fear again.
It was so intense. It was coming from inside that just, you need to leave now.
Wow.
We have to leave now. And again, like I said, I spent a career in law enforcement. I've never felt that kind of fear ever, and never felt it again. And I think that's why it took me a few days to want to go back to that area to even look.
So when you were back, that fear was, did you go with your dog or by yourself?
I took my husband and we took our dog, and of course he didn't know what to think about the whole situation. But I did not want to go by myself. And,
but you didn't feel any fear when you got back?
I did not. And when we walk out there, even to this day, and I have never seen anything like it again. And I've never felt that level of fear out there.
Wow.
And the rock, it's a very, very large rock sitting in this ravine, covered. You'll see one or two petroglyphs here and there, maybe a few on a rock. This one, it looks like what it reminded me of a highway. Like this is the road sign.
Wow.
To something. I'm like, why is it in a ravine? It's not even up on a trail. It sits kind of in a arroyo. And it's covered in handprints, footprints, lots of spirals, which...
Wow. That's the gateway. That's the portal.
Yeah. And that's what I had heard. But, when you go to the rangers, they tell you, oh, it's just the universe. It's their way of depicting things. There's even what appears to be a camel, which is really interesting to me. It's not a horse. Yes, exactly. And a lot of all over.
In my opinion, when you see this, that signifies a gateway, a portal to the other dimension, to the other side.
100%.
And you see these all over the world. It's like the archaeologists, well, it means blah, 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 or the rangers. No. Because there is no supernatural worldview. That's a gateway, that's a portal. And I think you were in a place where, and you already said this, where you weren't supposed to be, but you were there anyway.
Right. It's just bothered me ever since, because like I said, I do investigations for a living, and you look for every plausible answer, and I've never been able to find one. And it's not something you go to church and talk about, and even your own family's kind of like, well, I don't know what that was.
I think
you're imagining something, or it was a shadow, or it was...
No, it wasn't a shadow. Next. You're a trained observer. You know what you saw. Your dog knew what he saw, and I believe what you encountered was a shapeshifter.
Yeah, 100%.
In my opinion, it makes no sense. The fact that you're near the petroglyphs, where you are, you're overcome with fear. Obviously, something is there. And then, of course, you got this, in the ravine. And then you knew you weren't supposed to be there, and you got out. I've heard this. by other people with other circumstances. There's this overwhelming fear, and they know they're not supposed to be there. They've got to leave and get out now.
Mm-hmm.
And so you didn't have any missing time or anything like that, right?
No.
Yeah, I just.
It was the fear. I can't even describe how intense the fear was. I had never felt that kind of fear before. And I mean, I think that's what bothered me the most is if it's just a dog, why am I afraid? I mean, I have control over my dog now.
Yeah, logically, it makes no sense. And I mean, if it's just another dog, it's just another dog, but it's not. And it disappears right in front of your face. I mean, right in front of your face. Your dog picks up on it. He's confused. And then you're hit with this overwhelming fear. I think,
And Han, it's the overwhelming fear that sort of proves it's a shapeshifter.
I'll give you the last word, but I'm voting for shapeshifter all day long. Give you the last word.
I appreciate that. And I mean, it makes me feel a little better that I'm not the only one in the world that's ever experienced something like this. And it's just interesting. It's never happened again.
That's good.
Yes.
Well, Dina, thanks so much for coming on the record. It's a great story. And once again, it shows us that, here you are, you're just out for a walk with the dog. You're not looking for anything. You're not thinking about anything. All of a sudden, boom, you're smack up against the supernatural. And that's why this show is called Supernatural Confrontations. Thanks so much for coming on the record. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Shamans and those who are engaged and embrace the occult sometimes have the ability to shapeshift. They can appear as another form. In the remake of a Lone Ranger movie, which we walked out of because it was just blatantly had occult underpinnings all the way through it.
Yeah, I believe it was a shapeshifter, 100%, especially the fear. Dynamic Dragoness. This is the sort of stuff we play here. So it's very interesting stuff. It's not just boring sermons. In fact, I don't do sermons, but we're looking at the deeper things like the timeline of the end days and things like that. So we just don't read just any old scripture. We do interesting stuff that the churches don't talk about. Guys, I'm going to hang up. I've got tomorrow off. That's mine and Gabe's date day. So I'll see you in 48 hours, guys. God bless.
Can turn into a crow or a raven. Well, here's another story. Pastor Curtis